Imagine a world older than time itself, where eons pass in silence and continents rise and crumble long before humans leave a trace. Vast stretches of history lie hidden, gaps so immense they challenge the very limits of our understanding. What secrets slumber in these shadowed epochs? Giant creatures, lost landscapes, or civilizations we cannot yet imagine? From frozen tundras to scorched deserts, the echoes of a distant past whisper to us, daring us to listen. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the unfathomable depths of prehistoric time, beyond memory, beyond imagination. The sun rises over the ruins of an ancient city, its walls fractured and weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Columns lie toppled, shards of pottery scatter across the dusty ground, and faint impressions of streets remain, barely visible beneath layers of soil. Here, in what is now Palestine, the remnants of once thriving civilizations whisper of lives that flourished and then vanished, leaving behind only fragments of their stories. Bronze tools glint faintly where sunlight catches them, silent witnesses to an era long gone. Yet these relics also hint at something far more puzzling: the sudden and catastrophic unraveling of entire societies. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, the Mediterranean world, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the cities of the Levant, and Egypt's eastern borders, faced a series of upheavals that would forever alter history. Fortresses once impregnable were abandoned. Trade networks, intricate and far-reaching, collapsed. Written records, when they survived at all, tell only fragments of the story: famine, war, social unrest. And yet, even with the evidence of destruction, the true causes remain elusive. Was it a wave of invasions by enigmatic sea peoples? Or perhaps a combination of environmental pressures, drought, famine, and earthquakes that stretched civilizations to their breaking points? Archaeologists have uncovered patterns suggesting widespread fire and structural damage, but questions linger. Why did some cities withstand the turmoil while others disappeared entirely? Why do certain regions show signs of sudden abandonment, leaving behind neatly arranged homes and storerooms full of goods, as if their inhabitants simply vanished? Even the Egyptians, masters of record-keeping, hint at a world descending into chaos, describing foreign invaders and lost territories with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Some scholars suggest that systemic failures, over-reliance on complex trade, rigid hierarchies, and climate stress made these societies unusually fragile. Others propose that waves of migrations, possibly triggered by famine or conflict, destabilized political structures, spreading panic and collapse. And then there are the more speculative interpretations: celestial phenomena, unexplained epidemics, or even collective social unrest sparked by cultural and economic pressures that modern historians can only partially reconstruct. None of these explanations, however, fully account for the abruptness and scale of the collapse. As we trace the ruins, we notice subtle signs: layers of ash in pottery kilns, abandoned fortresses half buried in sand, and hastily sealed storage rooms. These hints suggest not just disaster, but a society attempting to survive amidst an unraveling world. Some sites reveal evidence of refugees moving inland, carrying with them fragments of cultural practices, while others show total erasure, as if entire cities were erased from memory. It is this patchwork of destruction and survival that continues to fascinate historians, archaeologists, and curious minds alike. And so, we are left with questions that defy easy answers. What precisely triggered the Bronze Age collapse? Could these forces have been predicted or mitigated? Did humanity of that era comprehend the scale of the changes enveloping them? Or did they, like us, simply witness the world shifting in ways that felt beyond understanding, The silence of the ruins speaks louder than any written record, inviting us to ponder the impermanence of human achievement. And as we walk among the remains of these ancient cities, we cannot help but wonder, are there truths about this era still buried, waiting to be uncovered beneath layers of soil and centuries of mystery? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach, leaving only fragments and the quiet hum of history itself to guide our imagination. From the crumbling remnants of Bronze Age cities, our journey takes us further back, into a world that predates even the earliest known civilizations. High on a plateau in southeastern Anatolia, the sun casts long shadows over massive stone circles at Göbekli Tepe. The site is a marvel. Towering T-shaped pillars, intricately carved with animals, abstract symbols, and enigmatic motifs rise from the earth like frozen sentinels. The carvings are astonishingly sophisticated, their precision defying the expectations of a society believed to have been strictly hunter-gatherers. Dust drifts lazily across the site, settling on stones that have remained untouched for over 11 millennia, leaving a silence that feels almost deliberate. Göbekli Tepe was built between 9,600 and 8,200 BC, long before the emergence of cities, writing, or metallurgy. Yet here, these massive megaliths suggest a level of organization, collaboration, and artistic expression that seems almost impossible for a culture without settled agriculture. Archaeologists have meticulously unearthed evidence of feasting, ritual gatherings, and complex construction techniques. The site hints at a social and spiritual world in which humans were capable of extraordinary feats. But then, almost inexplicably, it was deliberately abandoned, buried, and left to sleep beneath layers of earth. Why would a society go to such lengths to construct monumental architecture only to cover it intentionally and abandon it? Some scholars suggest practical reasons: climate shifts, declining resources, or the gradual transition from foraging to farming. Perhaps the site's builders moved on as their lifestyles changed, taking with them knowledge and rituals that would vanish from the archaeological record. But practical explanations alone cannot fully account for the careful, almost reverent manner in which the structures were interred. Stones were toppled in precise patterns, carvings hidden from sight, and the circles left to become part of the earth itself. There is a sense of intention, even secrecy, that challenges our understanding of prehistoric human behavior. Adding to the mystery is the sophistication of the art itself. Predators, birds, snakes, and abstract symbols, each etched into limestone, appear with a consistency and style that suggests not randomness, but purpose. Were these depictions sacred? Did they record knowledge, myth, or memory that we are unable to decode? And if so, what prompted the sudden decision to conceal it all? Göbekli Tepe invites us to consider that prehistoric humans may have possessed a depth of cultural and spiritual life far greater than we often credit them with. Speculative interpretations abound, yet none can be confirmed. Some propose astronomical or calendrical significance. Could the alignments and carvings have been linked to celestial cycles, guiding seasonal gatherings or ritual observances? Others wonder if the site represents a communal attempt to cope with environmental stress or social upheaval, a shared project that reinforced social cohesion in a time of uncertainty. Fringe theories even suggest that forgotten knowledge or advanced understanding may have existed in these early societies, lost when the site was buried. Each theory, however, remains tentative, leaving room for imagination but anchored in the tangible: stone pillars, weathered carvings, and the very ground beneath our feet. Walking among the circles today, one is struck by the sheer scale and the echoes of lives long vanished. The stones speak of labor, planning, and shared purpose, yet they speak in riddles, withholding their full story. Unlike more recent ruins, where artifacts can be interpreted with some certainty, Göbekli Tepe resists straightforward explanation. Its abandonment feels intentional but inscrutable, leaving only traces and patterns for archaeologists to puzzle over. What motivated the builders to construct such a monumental site, and then, with deliberate care, to conceal it from the future? Was it fear, reverence, practicality, or something else entirely, now lost to time? As the wind whispers across the plateau, dust swirls around the carved pillars, and sunlight catches the faint lines of ancient artistry, we are reminded that human history is far older and more mysterious than we often realize. Göbekli Tepe sits at the edge of what we can comprehend, a monument to ingenuity and enigma alike. And as we ponder the reasons for its abandonment, the silence of the site compels reflection. What knowledge, what rituals, what lives, and perhaps even what truths about our own origins lie buried beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The answers remain elusive, but the questions themselves continue to draw us back, millennia after the last human footstep faded from the plateau. From the silent stones of Göbekli Tepe, we move forward in time, tracing the echoes of human societies as they confront turbulence, upheaval, and the unknown. By the late 2nd millennium BC, the Mediterranean world was a complex mosaic of kingdoms, trading networks, and fortified cities, stretching from Egypt and Palestine to Anatolia, Greece, and the Aegean Islands. Yet in the midst of this apparent stability, a shadow appeared, one that would leave its mark on history, though its origins remain shrouded in mystery. These were the so-called Sea Peoples. Along the southern coast of the Levant, waves of dark-hulled ships would have appeared on the horizon, silhouettes against the rising sun. Harbors once bustling with merchants and fishermen fell silent as fleets moved with purpose and power. Egyptian reliefs and inscriptions depict warriors with plumed helmets and long spears, ships bristling with oars, approaching fortified cities and landing along the shores. Yet who exactly these peoples were, and from where they came, remains a question that continues to perplex historians. Some suggest they were displaced tribes fleeing famine or conflict. Others propose they were seasoned maritime raiders whose identities and homelands have been lost to time. The evidence of their impact is striking. Cities in Anatolia, the Aegean, and along the Levantine coast, including areas of what is now Palestine, experienced sudden destruction. Palaces burned, walls toppled, and trade networks that had spanned hundreds of miles collapsed almost overnight. Inscriptions from Egyptian pharaohs, such as Ramesses III, describe battles at sea and on land, listing names and descriptions of these invaders with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Yet, despite these records, the Sea Peoples themselves remain almost entirely anonymous. Unlike other migrations or invasions, there is little evidence of settlements. They appear suddenly, wreak havoc, and then vanish from historical sight. Some scholars argue that the Sea Peoples were not a single group, but a coalition, an amalgamation of dislocated populations, opportunistic raiders, and desperate survivors of wider societal collapse. If so, their attacks may have been as much a symptom of global instability as a cause. The collapse of trade, the weakening of major kingdoms, and climatic stress may have left societies vulnerable, providing an opening for those seeking land, resources, or safety. The Sea Peoples may have been driven not by ambition, but necessity, responding to forces much larger than themselves. Yet even this measured interpretation leaves questions unanswered. Why do Egyptian records depict them with such distinctive iconography and names, yet fail to connect them with any known homeland? Could they have originated from the Aegean, the central Mediterranean, or even the distant Anatolian coasts? Some theorists suggest that astronomical events, Seismic activity or prolonged drought may have triggered mass migrations that culminated in these maritime incursions. Others ponder the possibility of unexplained forces, social upheavals, forgotten conflicts, or economic collapses so profound that they reshaped entire civilizations without leaving traceable explanations. Archaeological traces add both clarity and uncertainty. In coastal cities, layers of ash and collapsed fortifications indicate rapid destruction. Yet in other regions, artifacts and architecture hint at continuity, societies adapting, absorbing, or even resisting these waves of disruption. Trade, once extensive and carefully maintained, fractured. Luxury goods vanished from markets. Cultural exchanges slowed. And yet, life continued, suggesting resilience amid chaos. The Sea Peoples, in this sense, were both destructive and transformative, a catalyst in a world already teetering on the edge of collapse. Alongside these tangible traces, enigmatic questions linger. Were these invasions coordinated campaigns or sporadic movements of disparate groups? Were there alliances among the Sea Peoples, or was their cohesion a construct of later chroniclers? Why do some regions report total devastation while others appear almost untouched, their cities surviving as if shielded by circumstance or geography? Each piece of evidence invites us to speculate, but the full picture remains tantalizingly out of reach. Even today, the legend of the Sea Peoples captures the imagination. Scholars trace faint clues through inscriptions, pottery, and shipwrecks, yet the human stories remain largely silent. Who were these people in life? Not just in Egyptian reliefs. What dreams, fears, and struggles propelled them across the sea? Did they see themselves as invaders, survivors, or explorers venturing into an uncertain world? These questions linger as we gaze upon the ancient coastline, imagining the rhythmic pounding of oars, the tension of battle, and the uncertain futures of those caught in the tide of history. In reflecting on the Sea Peoples, we are reminded that human history is not linear, nor fully knowable. Entire populations, movements, and conflicts have left only partial traces, surviving in fragments of inscriptions, ruined fortresses, and displaced artifacts. What appears at first as invasion may also be migration, adaptation, or even a complex interplay of forces that we are only beginning to understand. And as we trace these shadows through the Mediterranean world, we are confronted with the limits of knowledge. A reminder that even in a well-documented era, vast gaps remain, and the story of human civilization contains mysteries as profound as those at the edge of prehistory. So we are left with the questions that continue to draw historians, archaeologists, and curious minds alike. How much do we truly know about these movements, and how much has been lost to time, buried beneath layers of sand and history? Could the Sea Peoples represent a phenomenon larger than individual groups, an echo of societal collapse, environmental stress, and human resilience intersecting in ways we can scarcely reconstruct? The answers remain elusive, yet it is precisely this uncertainty that keeps the past alive, calling us to explore further, to imagine, and to wonder what might still lie hidden beneath the waves of history. From the crashing waves and distant shores where the Sea Peoples once struck, we move inland and across centuries, into a world where the aftermath of collapse reverberated through every city, town, and village. The Mediterranean, once a network of thriving trade and cultural exchange, now witnessed silence in some regions, rubble in others. In the Levant, including areas of what is now Palestine, communities grappled with scarcity, uncertainty, and the slow erosion of knowledge passed down from earlier civilizations. The Bronze Age collapse had left its mark, and what followed would come to be remembered as a period of fragmentation and obscurity, the so-called Dark Ages. Traveling through the landscape of this era, one sees echoes of prior greatness juxtaposed with stark absence. Fortified citadels, once bustling with soldiers, merchants, and artisans, lie half-buried beneath soil. Stones that once gleamed with carved symbols and inscriptions now bear only the faintest traces of human hands. Pottery fragments scatter across dry, empty fields, hinting at daily life that abruptly ceased. Even the simplest markers of civilization, written records, monumental architecture, trade networks, become sparse, leaving historians to piece together a fragmented narrative from whispers in the archaeological record. This period, roughly spanning from 1200 BC to 900 BC in the eastern Mediterranean, is characterized by an unsettling combination of destruction and disappearance. Palaces, once vibrant with administrative activity, were abandoned. Trade networks that had linked Egypt, Anatolia, the Aegean, and Palestine fragmented or vanished entirely. Languages and scripts faded from daily use in some regions, leaving a silence in the written record that can feel almost palpable. The collapse was not uniform. Some settlements adapted, some thrived in smaller localized networks, while others vanished, leaving nothing but scorched earth and memory. Scholars have debated the causes of this age-long shadow for decades. Environmental stress may have played a role. Droughts, crop failures, and shifting climate patterns could have undermined agricultural societies, forcing migration, conflict, and social instability. Economic and social factors, such as over-reliance on complex trade networks or rigid hierarchical systems, may have rendered societies vulnerable to sudden shocks. And then there are the remnants of violence, bodies buried hastily, fortifications destroyed, and inscriptions recording invasions, migrations, and upheaval that suggest human agency intertwined with environmental pressures. Yet even with these explanations, the period retains an air of mystery. Why do some regions show evidence of recovery within a few generations, while others remain silent for centuries? How much knowledge of metallurgy, writing, construction, and governance was lost only to be relearned generations later? And why do some communities, particularly in coastal and inland Palestine, appear to have maintained continuity while others disintegrated entirely? The pattern is inconsistent, defying simple models of decline or collapse, leaving historians and archaeologists both puzzled and intrigued. Evidence from this period offers glimpses into human resilience amid uncertainty. In some sites, settlements shrank, becoming more dispersed and less centralized. Agriculture continued, though on a smaller scale, and trade persisted in limited forms. Artifacts hint at continued cultural expression, but often in simplified forms. Pottery decorated with modest motifs, tools fashioned from local resources rather than imported metals. Even the construction of religious or communal spaces continued, though on a smaller, more understated scale than the monumental architecture of the Bronze Age. These fragments suggest that life went on, but in a world stripped of the stability and interconnectedness that had defined the prior era. Speculative interpretations add further layers to this enigmatic period. Could waves of migration and displacement have carried knowledge and culture into new regions, subtly reshaping societies in ways we cannot fully trace? Were there lost technologies or forgotten practices, methods of irrigation, navigation, or metallurgy that disappeared in these centuries, leaving gaps that later civilizations struggled to fill? And might the Dark Ages also conceal stories of adaptation, resilience, and hidden networks of communication that remain invisible to the archaeological record? Each unanswered question reminds us of the vast unknowns that continue to lie beneath layers of history. Walking through these sites today, the silence is profound. Stones that once marked walls and homes now echo only faintly with the voices of long-gone inhabitants. Abandoned hearths, Empty grain storage pits and worn paths through fields offer tantalizing clues, yet they do not tell the full story. The Dark Ages, in this sense, are not merely a period of loss. They are a reminder that human history is rarely neat or continuous. Civilization can fragment, knowledge can disappear, and yet traces remain, waiting for those willing to listen and piece together the fragments. As we reflect on this period, we are confronted with a humbling realization. Much of the human experience from these centuries is irretrievably lost. The silence challenges our assumptions about progress, resilience, and continuity. How many lives, discoveries, and stories were extinguished, leaving only hints in pottery shards, scattered ruins, or the faintest traces of writing? What lessons about adaptation, survival, or failure are buried in these gaps, and how might they reshape our understanding of humanity's past? The Dark Ages remind us that history is not merely a linear chain of events, but a landscape marked by sudden ruptures, prolonged silences, and unexpected continuities. They compel us to confront the fragility of human achievement and the enduring mysteries that remain hidden beneath centuries of time. And as we move forward in our exploration, these questions linger, urging us to look closer, think deeper, and wonder what still lies beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. From the shores scarred by the sudden onslaught of the sea peoples, we move further into the aftermath, into a world where the once vibrant cities of the eastern Mediterranean now lie in shadows. The Levant, including what is now Palestine, bears the quiet scars of societal upheaval. Fields that once fed dense populations are dotted with abandoned homes. Fortifications stand half-collapsed, their walls hollowed by fire or time, while the pathways connecting towns and harbors lie largely deserted. Even the harbors that once teemed with merchants and sailors are silent, the waves lapping against weathered stones that tell a story of sudden disruption. This period, roughly spanning from 1200 BC to 900 BC, is what historians often call the Dark Ages. Civilization, as it had been known during the Late Bronze Age, had fragmented. Palaces burned or abandoned. Trade networks that once spanned hundreds of miles disintegrated. Systems of record-keeping and literacy faltered. In some regions, the knowledge of metallurgy, architecture, and agriculture appears to have been partially lost, leaving future generations to rediscover or reinvent what had been taken for granted. What had seemed enduring, cities, empires, and cultural continuity, was suddenly fragile, destabilized by a combination of forces that remain only partially understood. Archaeological evidence reveals both devastation and resilience. In sites across Anatolia, Greece, and Palestine, layers of ash and toppled walls speak of destruction. Yet in other settlements, smaller communities persisted, adapting to the new conditions, maintaining subsistence agriculture, and continuing local trade on a limited scale. Pottery becomes simpler. Artistic expression is more subdued. Written records, when they exist, are sparse, hinting at a loss of bureaucratic sophistication. Life went on, but the infrastructure and organization that had characterized the previous era were gone. Mainstream explanations often point to environmental stress, economic disruption, and social upheaval as primary causes. Droughts and crop failures could have undermined agriculture, leading to famine and forced migrations. Trade networks, so central to the Late Bronze Age, collapsed, creating shortages of essential resources and destabilizing once powerful polities. Societies reliant on hierarchical structures may have lacked the flexibility to respond to these combined pressures, accelerating their decline. And yet, these explanations, while plausible, fail to capture the full complexity of the era, leaving tantalizing gaps that challenge historians to consider alternative perspectives. Could waves of migration and population displacement have played a larger role than previously thought? Some communities may have been forced to abandon ancestral lands entirely, leaving behind remnants of culture and knowledge that never resurfaced? Could sudden, large-scale conflicts, spurred by famine, competition for resources, or social unrest, have intensified the collapse, creating a feedback loop of instability? Even more speculative questions arise. Were there unknown climatic events, seismic activity, or disease outbreaks that compounded the fragility of these societies? The evidence is fragmentary, leaving room for wonder as much as for certainty. What makes the Dark Ages particularly enigmatic is the unevenness of its effects. Some regions, especially coastal settlements, appear to have retained continuity, while others, particularly inland cities, vanish from the record entirely. How did certain populations survive and adapt, while others disappeared without trace? Could local leadership, geography, or access to critical resources have dictated survival? And what knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices were lost forever during this period, only to be rediscovered centuries later? Walking through the ruins today, one cannot help but feel the tension between presence and absence. Empty hearths, collapsed structures, and fragments of pottery suggest lives abruptly interrupted. Yet subtle traces hint at resilience. Simple irrigation channels, small communal structures, and modest tools indicate that human ingenuity persisted even in the face of widespread disruption. The Dark Ages, in this sense, were not merely a period of decline. They were a crucible, testing the adaptability of human societies while leaving behind profound gaps in the historical record. These gaps invite reflection and speculation. What did people of this era know that we cannot reconstruct? What rituals, governance structures, and social networks survived, and what vanished without a trace? Could the cultural memory of these centuries have influenced subsequent civilizations in ways we cannot yet detect? The more we investigate, the more we realize that history is rarely a smooth continuum. It is punctuated by abrupt ruptures, silent centuries, and mysteries that persist despite centuries of scholarship. The Dark Ages remind us of the fragility and resilience of human civilization. They challenge our assumptions about continuity and progress, revealing that even the most sophisticated societies can fracture, leaving behind traces that speak in riddles rather than certainties. And as we explore this shadowed period, we are left with questions that extend beyond archaeology and history. How much of our past remains hidden, and how many truths about humanity's resilience and adaptability are waiting to be rediscovered beneath the silent layers of time? The silence of the ruins compels reflection. Each abandoned settlement, each fragment of pottery, each toppled wall is a testament to both human vulnerability and persistence. And while the Dark Ages may appear as a period of loss, they also hint at stories waiting to be told, lessons waiting to be learned, and mysteries that continue to challenge our understanding of human history. What remains hidden beneath these centuries may yet reshape our perception of the past, and remind us that even in apparent darkness, the human story endures. From the shadowed ruins of the Eastern Mediterranean and the fragile, scattered settlements of the Dark Ages, our exploration shifts across continents and centuries, arriving in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica. Here, sunlight filters through a thick canopy of ceiba and ceiba-like trees, dappling monumental stone structures with shifting patterns of light and shadow. In the lowlands of what is now Guatemala and southern Mexico, the great cities of the Maya civilization rise in memory. Stepped pyramids, intricately carved stelae, and vast plazas that once echoed with the voices of priests, rulers, and traders. Yet, despite their grandeur, the archaeological record reveals a profound enigma, a period known to scholars as the Maya Hiatus. The Maya Hiatus, roughly spanning the 6th and 7th centuries AD, is a mysterious pause in the otherwise continuous growth of classic Maya civilization. Monumental construction slowed or halted, The erection of stelae, once a hallmark of royal power and ritual, became sporadic or ceased entirely. Hieroglyphic records show long gaps, with kings and dynasties suddenly vanishing from the historical record. It is a silence that speaks as loudly as any inscription, suggesting disruption, uncertainty, or forces beyond human control. Cities such as Tikal, Copan, and Palenque exhibit signs of continuity in some areas, while other sites appear abandoned, left to be reclaimed by jungle growth. Scholars have proposed several explanations for this enigmatic pause. Climatic shifts are one prominent theory. Evidence from sediment cores, isotopic analysis, and tree rings suggest periods of prolonged drought during the hiatus, which could have stressed agriculture and water management systems. In a civilization so dependent on precise calendrical and agricultural knowledge, even a few years of crop failure might have triggered societal disruption, migration, or regional conflicts over dwindling resources. Yet the drought theory, while compelling, does not fully explain the unevenness of the hiatus. Some cities continued ceremonial practices, albeit at reduced intensity, while others fell silent. Political and social factors may also have contributed. The classic Maya world was a complex network of city-states, each with its own ruling dynasty, alliances, and rivalries. Could internal strife, coups, or revolts have temporarily stalled monumental construction and record-keeping? The archaeological evidence hints at fortified structures and defensive walls, suggesting concerns over security or conflict. Some cities may have shifted priorities from ceremonial grandeur to survival, focusing on local administration, trade continuity, and resource management rather than ostentatious displays of power. Yet even here, the record is tantalizingly incomplete, leaving much to speculation. Adding further intrigue are the subtle and often puzzling archaeological patterns. The Maya hiatus is not a uniform collapse. Certain cities show signs of recovery within decades, while others remain dormant for generations. Artifacts indicate continued trade in some regions, suggesting that economic networks persisted despite political or ceremonial disruptions. Hieroglyphic inscriptions occasionally resume, as if civilization itself were taking a breath before continuing its narrative. Why this selective pause occurred, and why the rhythms of growth, abandonment, and revival varied across the region, remains an open question. Speculative theories extend the mystery. Some suggest that unforeseen epidemics or social upheavals may have temporarily depopulated urban centers. Others propose environmental events beyond simple drought, such as deforestation, soil degradation, or even seismic disturbances, which could have altered settlement patterns and agricultural capacity. There are also fringe interpretations that speculate on collective cultural shifts, changes in ritual practice or cosmological belief that led rulers and priests to deliberately slow monumental projects, favoring introspection, adaptation, or recalibration over expansion. Each possibility leaves us with questions, emphasizing the gap between what we can observe and what we cannot. Walking among the ruins today, the Maya hiatus becomes almost tangible. Overgrown plazas, toppled stelae, and partially restored temples tell stories of pauses, interruptions, and uncertainty. Hieroglyphs half-carved or abandoned mid-inscription evoke the human element of this mystery. Artisans, scribes, and rulers working against an invisible pressure, whether environmental, political, or spiritual. The silence between these voices is as compelling as the monuments themselves, inviting contemplation of what life may have been like during this uncertain interval. The hiatus challenges assumptions about the continuity of human civilization. It reminds us that even societies capable of extraordinary engineering, astronomical observation, and administrative sophistication can experience periods of disruption whose causes remain elusive. It also emphasizes the unevenness of history. Some communities adapt, some decline, and some vanish almost entirely, leaving traces only in stone, soil, and memory. What knowledge, rituals, or networks were temporarily lost during this pause, and what insights about resilience or vulnerability might they hold? And so, the Maya hiatus stands as both a puzzle and a mirror. It compels us to wonder not only about the distant past, but about the fragility of complex societies across time. Why did the rhythm of Maya life falter in some areas while continuing in others? How did human decision-making, environmental conditions, and unforeseen challenges intersect to produce this enigmatic pause? And what still remains hidden beneath the canopy? Lost cities, unexcavated inscriptions, or ecological clues that could illuminate this chapter of prehistory. In the quiet of the jungle, with vines curling around towering stones and sunlight filtering through the leaves, we are reminded that history is not a continuous narrative. It is marked by sudden pauses, silences, and mysteries that endure for centuries. The Maya hiatus is one such mystery, a shadowed interval that urges reflection, curiosity, and patient investigation. And as we continue our journey into the prehistoric gaps beyond human understanding, this question lingers. How much of human experience, knowledge, and ingenuity lies hidden, awaiting rediscovery in the quiet pauses of history? From the dense jungles of Mesoamerica and the enigmatic pause of the Maya hiatus, we journey back across continents and millennia to the heart of Mesopotamia, the cradle of some of the earliest empires. Here, between the life-giving waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, stretched the Akkadian Empire, one of the first great political entities in human history. Once a vast realm of cities, canals, and temples, the Akkadian heartland is now marked by silent ruins, mounds of mud brick, and faint impressions of roads and irrigation channels. The landscape is both familiar and alien, the desert winds whispering through remnants of monumental structures that speak of a civilization at the peak of ingenuity and on the brink of collapse. Founded around 2334 BC by Sargon of Akkad, the empire united city-states of Mesopotamia under a centralized authority, establishing networks of trade, administration, and communication that spanned hundreds of kilometers. Cities such as Akkad, Kish, and Agade became hubs of culture, commerce, and innovation. The Akkadians refined cuneiform writing, developed sophisticated bureaucracies, and built fortifications and canals to control both water and population. For over a century, the empire flourished, creating a template for governance, economy, and culture that would influence civilizations for generations. Yet, as the archaeological record reveals, this golden age was not to last. By around 2154 BC, the empire had disintegrated, leaving its cities abandoned and its records fragmented. Excavations uncover crumbled walls, evidence of flooding, and layers of sand and silt that suggest sudden and dramatic environmental changes. Contemporary records, sparse though they are, hint at widespread famine, social unrest, and invasions by groups that remain largely unnamed in the surviving inscriptions. And yet, even with these clues, the precise mechanisms of collapse elude full explanation, leaving the Akkadian Empire as one of the earliest and most perplexing examples of societal disintegration. Mainstream explanations often emphasize environmental factors. Paleoclimatic evidence indicates a prolonged and severe drought during the late Akkadian period, which could have disrupted agriculture and water management. Crops failed, livestock perished, and famine spread across the empire's extensive territories. Canals and irrigation systems, the backbone of Mesopotamian civilization, may have become clogged with silt or abandoned, accelerating the decline. It is a scenario that resonates with modern concerns about climate vulnerability. Even highly organized societies can falter when the environment shifts beyond their capacity to adapt. Yet environmental stress alone cannot fully account for the suddenness and scope of the collapse. Archaeological and textual evidence points to concurrent social and political instability. Fortified cities suggest concerns over internal rebellion or external raids. Administrative tablets reveal abrupt gaps in record-keeping, hinting at disruptions in governance and communication. Could the empire's size and complexity have made it inherently fragile, so that any combination of environmental and social stressors triggered a cascading failure? And why did some cities survive or recover, while others were abandoned entirely? Speculative interpretations further deepen the mystery. Some scholars propose that waves of migration or conflict from peripheral regions, tribes displaced by drought or competition, may have destabilized Akkadian society. Others suggest that the empire's very success created conditions for its downfall. Overextension, economic dependence on distant regions, and social stratification could have made the system brittle. There are even more imaginative theories that hint at forgotten technological, cultural, or ritual practices whose disruption may have weakened societal cohesion. While these remain hypotheses, they underscore the enigmatic nature of this collapse, a civilization sophisticated beyond imagination, yet vulnerable to forces both human and natural. Walking among the ruins today, the silence is profound. Mud brick foundations, partially eroded walls, and the faint outlines of canals testify to human ambition and ingenuity. Tools, pottery shards, and inscribed tablets hint at daily life. Yet the narrative of continuity is broken. Kings and scribes vanish from the record. Once thriving cities are reclaimed by the desert. And in that silence lies the haunting question of history. How could one of the most advanced empires of its time unravel so completely, leaving only fragments to tell the story? The collapse of the Akkadian Empire is a reminder of the delicate balance upon which human civilization rests. It challenges the assumption that technological advancement, centralized authority, or cultural sophistication alone guarantees survival. Instead, it suggests that environmental pressures, social dynamics, and perhaps unpredictable events can converge to create profound gaps in human history. And in those gaps, buried beneath layers of silt, sand, and time, lie stories, knowledge, and experiences that may never be fully recovered. As we reflect on Akkad, we confront questions that extend far beyond Mesopotamia. How many other societies have vanished, leaving only fragments of evidence? How do environmental change, social complexity, and human decision-making intersect to produce collapse? And what lessons can these ancient examples hold for us today? And finally, what secrets remain hidden beneath the desert plains, waiting to reveal insights into a civilization whose brilliance and fragility continue to intrigue and perplex us? The ruins of Akkad, silent and weathered, invite contemplation. They remind us that history is not simply a linear progression of achievement, but a tapestry woven with triumphs, vulnerabilities, and unresolved mysteries. And as we continue our exploration of prehistoric and ancient time gaps beyond human understanding, the story of the Akkadian Empire lingers, a testament to both human ingenuity and the profound unknowns that shape our shared past. From the vast plains of Mesopotamia, where the Akkadian Empire once flourished and fell, our journey moves westward across the Mediterranean, toward the rugged mountains and fertile valleys of southern Greece. Here, atop steep hills, the remnants of Mycenaean citadels rise as silent witnesses to a world of splendor, power, and sudden disappearance. Cyclopean walls, built from massive stones without mortar, twist and wind around the peaks of sites like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Inside these fortifications, the echoes of past grandeur linger, frescoes depicting warriors and chariots, gold ornaments glittering faintly beneath layers of dust, and storage jars that once held the staples of a complex and sophisticated civilization. The Mycenaean civilization, which reached its peak between 1600 and 1100 BC, was a network of palace-centered states, each ruled by powerful kings whose authority extended over surrounding towns and farmland. They built monumental architecture, developed linear B writing for record-keeping, and maintained extensive trade networks across the Aegean and the eastern Mediterranean. For centuries, Mycenaean Greece exemplified order, prosperity, and artistic achievement. Yet, as archaeological layers reveal, this civilization did not endure. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean world abruptly fractured, leaving behind fortified citadels abandoned, stores emptied, and monumental architecture left unfinished. Mainstream explanations for the collapse often highlight a combination of internal and external pressures. Natural disasters, earthquakes, droughts, or famine may have destabilized fragile economic and political systems. Evidence of widespread fires, toppled walls, and hastily buried valuables suggest sudden violence or catastrophic events. Social upheaval and political instability could have compounded these problems, with palace economies struggling to maintain control over dependent towns and trade networks. Some scholars point to invasions or migrations as catalysts. The Sea Peoples, local marauders, or displaced populations might have penetrated Mycenaean defenses, intensifying the breakdown. Yet, despite these plausible scenarios, no single cause fully accounts for the dramatic and nearly simultaneous collapse across multiple regions. Adding to the mystery is the unevenness of the evidence. Some Mycenaean centers, like Athens and certain coastal settlements, show signs of continuity or delayed decline, while other citadels were abandoned entirely. Why did some cities withstand the pressures that felled others? What factors allowed partial survival of communities, while the intricate palace-based networks crumbled? The gaps in the historical and archaeological record leave us piecing together fragments of a story whose full complexity remains hidden beneath centuries of soil and time. Speculative interpretations further deepen the enigma. Could climate change have triggered waves of migration, pushing desperate populations into Mycenaean territory and disrupting established social orders? Were there cascading economic failures, where the breakdown of trade led to shortages of essential goods, undermining both palace authority and urban life? Some suggest that widespread social unrest, a revolt of laborers, displaced farmers, or disenfranchised elites, may have contributed to the sudden abandonment of monumental centers. Even fringe theories hint at unknown disasters or lost knowledge, suggesting that the Mycenaean collapse, like other prehistoric disruptions, may reflect the fragility of human civilization in the face of forces both natural and human. Walking through these ruins today, one is struck by the tension between permanence and impermanence. Cyclopean walls, built to last centuries, now crumble under the weight of time. Storerooms once brimming with oil, grain, and wine lie empty. Frescoed halls bear only faint traces of color. The Mycenaean collapse is not merely a story of destruction. It is a narrative of sudden silence, of lives interrupted, of knowledge partially lost. Inscriptions in Linear B, once carefully maintained, abruptly cease in some regions, leaving gaps that scholars can only attempt to interpret. The civilization that had meticulously recorded its world vanished almost overnight, leaving only fragments for future generations to ponder. The Mycenaean experience underscores a recurring theme in human history: the vulnerability of complex societies to sudden shocks. Political centralization, economic interdependence, and environmental pressures, all hallmarks of advanced civilization, can become points of fragility when disrupted. Yet within this collapse, we also glimpse resilience. Smaller settlements persisted, some towns adapted to new circumstances, and cultural memory continued through storytelling, oral tradition, and later Greek civilization. Even in Disappearance, The Mycenaeans left a legacy that would resonate for centuries. And yet, despite decades of research, many questions remain unanswered. Were natural disasters the final straw, or merely one of many contributing factors? Did the Mycenaeans face invaders, internal revolt, or a combination of both? How did human decision-making, environmental stress, and chance intersect to produce such a dramatic societal rupture? And crucially, what traces of knowledge, governance, or cultural practice were lost entirely, buried beneath layers of destruction and time? As we reflect on the Mycenaean collapse, we are reminded that history is rarely neat or continuous. Civilizations rise and fall, sometimes leaving abundant evidence, sometimes fading into silence. The ruins of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos stand as monuments to both human achievement and mystery, inviting contemplation of what has been lost, what has survived, and what may yet be discovered. In these silent stones, we sense the fragility of even the most sophisticated societies and the enduring allure of the unknown. What truths, experiences, and innovations remain hidden beneath these ruins, waiting for the patient observer to uncover them? The answers elude us, yet it is precisely this uncertainty that continues to draw us into the past, compelling us to explore the gaps and shadows of human history. From the crumbled palaces and fortified citadels of Mycenaean Greece, we turn eastward once again, tracing the echoes of collapse across the ancient world, to the heart of Anatolia, the realm of the Hittite Empire. Nestled among rugged mountains, river valleys, and high plateaus, the Hittite capital of Hattusa rises in memory as an extraordinary achievement of human organization and ambition. Massive stone walls encircle the city, punctuated by intricately carved gates adorned with lions and gods, while streets and temples reveal a civilization at its peak. Yet today, these ruins are silent, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, whispering of a society that vanished under mysterious circumstances. The Hittite Empire, which flourished from roughly 1600 to 1200 BC, controlled a vast territory stretching across Anatolia, northern Syria, and into the northern Levant, including regions of what is now Palestine. It was a civilization of kings, scribes, and warriors, skilled diplomats and master builders. The Hittites developed an extensive legal code, maintained elaborate records in cuneiform, and engaged in far-reaching trade networks. Their influence reached Egypt, Assyria, and Mesopotamia, leaving traces in treaties, correspondence, and monumental inscriptions. For centuries, the empire projected power and stability, commanding loyalty from vassal states and forging alliances through marriage, diplomacy, and strategic warfare. Yet around 1200 BC, the Hittite world began to unravel. The capital, Hattusa, was abandoned, its palaces and temples left to the elements. Archaeological layers reveal evidence of widespread destruction: walls toppled, gates burned, and storage rooms left scattered with broken vessels. Yet the precise causes remain elusive. Contemporary records are limited. Inscriptions survive in fragments, often incomplete or cryptic. The suddenness of the collapse mirrors the fates of other civilizations of the late Bronze Age: the Mycenaeans, the Akkadians, and cities along the Levantine coast, raising questions that continue to puzzle historians and archaeologists. Mainstream explanations emphasize a combination of environmental, social, and political pressures. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests periods of drought and disrupted rainfall, which could have stressed agricultural production, undermining the empire's economic base. Famine and resource scarcity may have triggered internal unrest or weakened Hittite control over distant territories. Political instability, combined with pressure from external groups, possibly including displaced peoples from the north and east, may have accelerated the decline. The convergence of multiple stressors, rather than a single catastrophic event, appears likely, yet no explanation fully captures the rapidity and scale of the Hittite disappearance. Intriguing patterns deepen the mystery. Some cities within the empire's sphere show evidence of continued occupation, while Hattusa itself was abandoned entirely, its royal archives left behind, almost frozen in time. Was the collapse sudden, triggered by invasion or revolt? Or was it gradual, a slow erosion of authority compounded by environmental stress and social fragmentation? How could such a sophisticated, well-organized civilization fail so completely, leaving few records and no clear successor state? Speculative interpretations invite further reflection. Could the Hittites have faced invasions from unknown groups, perhaps linked to the wider movements of the so-called Sea Peoples, whose presence reverberated across the Mediterranean and Near East? Might internal factionalism, dynastic disputes, or elite conflicts have played a larger role than previously thought? Some suggest that climate change, crop failure, and social disruption intersected in ways that overwhelmed even the most resilient administrative systems. Others hint at possible pandemics, seismic events, or other environmental catastrophes whose traces are subtle or yet undiscovered. Each hypothesis underscores a single truth. The Hittite End is a chapter defined as much by gaps as by evidence. Walking through the ruins of Hattusa today, the scale of achievement and the suddenness of disappearance are palpable. Towering gates and temple walls, meticulously laid foundations, and traces of ceremonial spaces all testify to a civilization that flourished for centuries, yet could not withstand the forces arrayed against it. The silence within the city streets is profound. It invites contemplation of lives interrupted, governance disrupted, and knowledge partially lost to time. Every stone, every fallen arch, every weathered inscription is a fragment of a story that we can glimpse but never fully reconstruct. The Hittite End reminds us of the fragility of even the most complex societies. Civilization, no matter how advanced or widespread, is vulnerable to environmental, social, and political stresses that may converge in unpredictable ways. And yet, within this collapse, we glimpse resilience. Cultural practices survived in vassal states, religious traditions persisted in modified forms, and diplomatic knowledge left traces in treaties and correspondences that would inform neighboring societies. The story of Hittite disappearance is not merely one of loss, but also of adaptation, memory, and the enduring echoes of a vanished world. And still, questions linger. How exactly did the Hittites respond to mounting crises before their capital fell silent? Were there attempts at reorganization, migration, or consolidation that left no trace? What knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices were lost when Hattusa was abandoned? And how did these gaps influence subsequent civilizations in the region? How much of human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptation remains hidden in these ruins waiting for discovery? The ruins of Hattusa, silent atop the Anatolian plateau, remind us that history is layered, fragile, and often incomplete. They invite us to ponder the forces, both seen and unseen, that shape human societies, and to reflect on the recurring patterns of rise, collapse, and survival that define the prehistoric and ancient world. As we continue our journey into the gaps beyond human understanding, the end of the Hittite Empire stands as a powerful testament to both the brilliance of human civilization and the enduring mysteries that lie at the edge of our knowledge. From the crumbled fortresses of Anatolia and the fading echoes of the Hittite Empire, our journey stretches eastward across mountains, rivers, and deserts to the fertile plains of the Yellow River in ancient China. Here the land is vast and undulating, the river weaving through less covered terraces, its waters both life-giving and destructive. Mist rises from the riverbanks in the early morning, curling around the remains of rammed earth foundations and scattered fragments of pottery, evoking a civilization long shrouded in legend. This is the domain traditionally associated with the Xia Dynasty, a society described in ancient chronicles, yet still tantalizingly elusive in the archaeological record. The Xia Dynasty, said to have existed from roughly 2070 to 1600 BC, occupies a curious space between myth and history. Chinese historiography credits Yu the Great with founding the dynasty after controlling catastrophic floods and establishing dynastic rule, setting patterns of governance that would echo through later Chinese civilization. Yet for centuries, historians debated whether the Xia was a real historical entity or a legendary precursor to the well-documented Shang dynasty. Recent archaeological discoveries in the central Yellow River region, particularly at sites like Erlitou, suggest urban planning, bronze production, and hierarchical organization consistent with early dynastic society, lending weight to the notion that the Xia may indeed have been the world's first Chinese dynasty. Walking through these sites, one is struck by both achievement and mystery. Foundations of palaces, workshops, and ceremonial platforms hint at centralized authority and social stratification. Bronze vessels, many intricately cast, indicate ritual practice and technological sophistication. Yet, despite these tantalizing traces, direct evidence tying these sites definitively to named Xia kings remains elusive. Inscriptions, if they existed, have yet to be discovered, leaving gaps between legend and material culture. How did the Xia govern, organize labor, or manage resources on such a large scale? And why does so much of their story remain veiled beneath layers of soil and later cultural memory? Mainstream interpretations focus on the development of early urban centers and the rise of hierarchical governance as the drivers behind the Xia's historical footprint. Erlitou, with its palatial complexes, craft workshops, and burial sites, suggests a society capable of large-scale construction and centralized administration. Agricultural production along the Yellow River, particularly millet and early rice cultivation, would have supported urban populations, while bronze metallurgy indicates advanced technological skills. Yet, while these factors explain the emergence of complex society, they do not fully account for the gaps, contradictions, and uncertainties that shroud the Xia narrative. Speculation deepens the mystery. Were natural disasters, floods, droughts, or seismic events responsible for periodic disruptions in the dynasty's continuity? Traditional accounts describe Yu the Great's legendary efforts to control flooding, hinting at the immense environmental challenges early dynasties faced. Could such pressures have led to cycles of decline, abandonment, or migration, leaving intermittent traces in the archaeological record? Alternatively, might internal power struggles, dynastic conflict, or social unrest have caused abrupt shifts in settlement patterns, erasing evidence of rulers and urban centers from memory? These questions emphasize the tension between legend and material evidence, highlighting the gaps in what we can reconstruct about the Xia world. Adding to the intrigue are the chronological and cultural connections between the Xia and surrounding regions. Bronze objects, ceramic styles, and burial practices suggest exchanges with contemporaneous societies along the Yellow River and its tributaries. Could these interactions, trade networks, and cultural flows explain both the rise of the Xia and the partial disappearance of its material record? And what role did human choice, adaptation, and ingenuity play in shaping a dynasty whose narrative survives in fragments of archaeology, oral tradition, and later historical chronicles? Visiting the ruins of Erlitou and surrounding sites today, the landscape conveys both human ingenuity and enigma. Rammed earth foundations rise from the soil, their shapes hinting at walls and buildings, while pits and workshops reveal traces of daily life, craft, and ritual. Yet much remains buried, inaccessible, or lost to the river's shifting course and centuries of sedimentation. The Xia dynasty exists as both a historical possibility and a legend, a civilization whose outlines we can glimpse, but whose full contours remain beyond reach. This duality invites reflection. The Xia reminds us that history is rarely complete, that memory, myth, and material evidence intertwine in complex ways. What knowledge, social structures, and innovations might have been lost to time? How much of human experience, governance, and adaptation remains hidden beneath the lush plains of northern China? And how do these early dynastic patterns resonate with the collapses, hiatuses, and enigmas we have seen across other regions of the ancient world? The Xia Dynasty, suspended between history and legend, teaches us to embrace uncertainty, to follow the fragments left behind, and to remain attuned to what lies unseen. Its ruins whisper of human ambition, technological skill, and resilience, yet they also speak of the profound gaps in knowledge that exist at the origins of civilization. As we continue our journey into prehistoric and early historic time gaps beyond human understanding, the Xia stands as a reminder that even the earliest dynasties, long celebrated in chronicles and memory, can leave mysteries that endure for millennia. What lies still hidden beneath the Yellow River Plains, waiting to illuminate the first chapters of human urban society, remains an invitation to wonder, explore, and discover. From the loose-covered plains of northern China and the enigmatic traces of the Xia Dynasty, our journey carries us southwest to the vast plains of the Indus River, where one of the world's earliest urban civilizations once flourished. Here, along the fertile floodplains and meandering waterways, the ruins of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other Indus Valley settlements lie beneath layers of silt and time. Streets, once meticulously planned in a grid pattern, are now quiet and overgrown. Remnants of baked brick houses, granaries, and drainage systems hint at an extraordinary level of urban sophistication. Yet the civilization that created these cities, remarkable in planning, sanitation, and craft, vanished, leaving behind one of prehistory's most perplexing mysteries. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing between roughly 2600 and 1900 BC, encompassed a network of urban centers stretching from the foothills of the Himalayas to the coast of the Arabian Sea. It was a society of remarkable planning and organization. Cities featured uniform bricks, advanced drainage systems, and large public buildings. Evidence of trade, both local and long distance, suggests connections with Mesopotamia and other contemporary cultures. Yet despite this apparent stability and sophistication, by 1900 BC, many cities had been abandoned, and the continuity of material culture began to break down. Streets that once bustled with activity fell silent, and the carefully constructed civic order seemed to dissolve. Scholars have long debated the reasons for this decline, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the phenomenon. Environmental theories suggest that changes in climate, river patterns, or monsoon cycles may have disrupted agriculture and water management. Sediment analyses and paleoclimate data indicate periods of drought and river course shifts, which could have undermined crop production and forced populations to relocate. Yet while environmental stress may explain some aspects of urban abandonment, it does not fully account for the scale of the societal contraction or the disappearance of certain cultural practices. Equally compelling are social and economic explanations. The Indus Valley's highly centralized urban planning and trade networks may have been vulnerable to disruption. Could the weakening of trade, resource scarcity, or internal political shifts have led to gradual depopulation? Unlike the hieroglyphic records of Egypt or the cuneiform archives of Mesopotamia, the Indus script remains undeciphered, leaving no written account to clarify decisions, crises, or governance failures. This silence amplifies the mystery, forcing us to reconstruct the narrative from the traces of cities, pottery, seals, and tools left behind. Speculative interpretations deepen the enigma. Some researchers suggest waves of migration, perhaps prompted by climate or conflict, may have stressed urban centers. Others hypothesize conflicts with neighboring groups or internal revolts that left little archaeological trace. Some have even proposed that sudden shifts in river courses, particularly the drying of the Gagar-Hakra or Indus tributaries, may have made large-scale urban life unsustainable, forcing populations to disperse into smaller, more flexible settlements. Could all of these factors, environmental, social, and human, have converged, creating a perfect storm that dismantled one of humanity's most remarkable early civilizations? Walking through the ruins today, the scale of achievement is breathtaking, even amidst decay. Streets laid in precise grids, wells and drainage systems, granaries, and fortified citadels all speak to a civilization of extraordinary planning and foresight. Yet the silence is equally compelling. No monumental tombs or palaces dominate the landscape, and inscriptions remain undeciphered, leaving us with only fragments of stories, names, and events. The Indus Valley collapse is not just the story of physical abandonment. It is the disappearance of a complex social, economic, and cultural system whose full workings may forever elude us. The Indus Valley experience underscores a recurring pattern in human history. Even the most technologically sophisticated societies can face abrupt and profound decline. Complex urban planning, centralized governance, and extensive trade networks, hallmarks of strength, can also render societies vulnerable to environmental stress, social disruption, or unforeseen calamities. And yet, in this decline, traces of resilience endure. Some Indus populations migrated eastward or southward, influencing subsequent cultures in the subcontinent, while craft traditions, agricultural practices, and trade knowledge persisted in modified forms. Civilization did not vanish entirely. It transformed, leaving behind tantalizing fragments for us to interpret. And still, questions remain. How did the Indus people respond to the mounting challenges before abandonment? What knowledge, technologies, and societal practices disappeared when the cities fell silent? How much of the civilization's urban expertise, religious practice, or social organization was lost to history, and how much survives hidden in smaller settlements or oral traditions? Could there have been events, climatic, seismic, or social, that left no trace yet fundamentally reshaped life along the Indus? The ruins of the Indus Valley remind us that history is never complete. It is punctuated by sudden gaps, silences, and enigmatic pauses, challenging our assumptions about continuity and human progress. And yet, these very gaps are what make the study of the past so compelling. They urge us to consider not only what has been discovered, but what remains buried, submerged, or forgotten. The Indus Valley decline, like the collapses and hiatuses we have explored elsewhere, is a powerful testament to both human achievement and the profound mysteries that endure at the edges of our knowledge. As we move forward in our exploration of prehistoric time gaps beyond human understanding, the story of the Indus Valley invites reflection, curiosity, and wonder. What lies still hidden beneath the floodplains and terraces? What aspects of early urban civilization remain invisible, awaiting discovery? And how might uncovering these secrets reshape our understanding of human ingenuity, resilience, and the fragility of complex societies? The answers remain elusive, but it is precisely this uncertainty that draws us deeper into the silent, enigmatic past. From the fertile plains of the Indus River and the organized streets of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, our journey now sweeps far north, across oceans and icy seas, to the edge of the known world in medieval Europe. Here lies Greenland, an island of towering fjords, jagged glaciers, and vast expanses of tundra, where waves crash against stark coastlines and snowdrifts carve silent valleys. The landscape is breathtaking and unforgiving, a land that seems eternal, yet holds echoes of a civilization that vanished almost as quietly as it arrived. Among these fjords and icy plains, the Norse, commonly called Vikings, once established thriving communities, leaving behind a puzzle that has puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries: the disappearance of Viking Greenland. The Norse settlement of Greenland began around 985 AD, when Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, established colonies along the southwestern coast. Two main settlements emerged: the eastern settlement near modern-day Qaqortoq, and the western settlement near Nuuk. Over the next centuries, these communities flourished. Stone houses, turf-covered longhouses, churches, and burial mounds testify to a structured, vibrant society. Pastoral farms dotted the fjords, while hunting, fishing, and trade provided sustenance and economic connection with Iceland, Norway, and beyond. Greenland became an extension of the Norse world, a place where European settlers had adapted to extreme environmental conditions and created a distinctly northern culture. Yet, by the early 15th century, the settlements had disappeared. The reasons remain enigmatic, and the archaeological record provides tantalizing but incomplete clues. Ruins of longhouses, churches, and farmsteads are scattered along the coast, but once thriving communities were abandoned, leaving few written accounts. Letters from Europe refer to Greenland, yet by the time explorers arrived decades later, they found empty valleys, collapsed buildings, and overgrown pastures, hinting at a sudden or gradual withdrawal. What caused a society that had survived in such a harsh environment for centuries to vanish almost entirely? Mainstream explanations point first to environmental factors. Climate data, ice cores, and dendrochronology reveal that Greenland entered a period of cooling known as the Little Ice Age, beginning around the 14th century. Winters grew longer and harsher, summers shorter and cooler, pastures dwindled, crops failed, and sea ice complicated both fishing and travel. For communities reliant on livestock and a precarious agricultural balance, these climatic shifts would have placed immense stress on survival. But while climate change provides a plausible backdrop, it alone does not explain why the settlements were abandoned rather than adapted. Social and economic pressures likely played a role. Norse Greenland depended on connections with Iceland and Norway for trade, including the export of walrus ivory, hides, and other goods in exchange for iron, timber, and essential supplies. Increasing isolation due to harsher seas may have disrupted trade, creating shortages of vital resources. Internal social structures, heavily reliant on hierarchical leadership and ecclesiastical organization, may have struggled to respond effectively to these combined pressures. Could a combination of climate, economic contraction, and social rigidity have created a tipping point, forcing the population to abandon settlements entirely? Yet the evidence also opens space for speculation. Archaeological analysis suggests that Norse Greenlanders may have been slower to adopt local Arctic adaptations than their Inuit neighbors, who mastered hunting, clothing, and shelter suited for extreme conditions. Did this cultural rigidity hinder survival in a changing environment? Or did social tension and conflict, perhaps competition over dwindling resources, exacerbate the crisis, leading to migration or collapse? Some scholars even propose that epidemics, isolated disease outbreaks, or accidents may have contributed to depopulation, although direct evidence is lacking. The result is a scenario in which multiple pressures intersected, leaving only fragments for us to interpret. The physical landscape itself carries echoes of the mystery. Standing among the ruins of turf-covered longhouses, one can imagine the rhythm of daily life: livestock being tended, families preparing meals, churches filled with muted hymns. Stone fences mark grazing plots, burial mounds signal care for the dead, and the remnants of docks hint at voyages to distant lands. Yet, there is also an eerie silence. Snowdrifts and moss-covered ruins suggest the passage of centuries. and the absence of subsequent habitation in these areas deepens the enigma. The civilization that adapted to ice, fjord, and tundra survived for generations only to vanish, leaving little trace of the social and cultural knowledge that once guided it. Speculative theories continue to intrigue. Some suggest that gradual migration back to Iceland or Norway occurred over decades, as families sought more hospitable lands. Others argue that violent encounters, perhaps with indigenous Inuit groups or internal conflict among settlers, may have contributed. Could sudden climatic catastrophes, such as storms or volcanic eruptions, have compounded ongoing stress, tipping the settlements into abandonment? Each hypothesis underscores the uncertainty surrounding Greenland's Norse communities. Even well-documented medieval societies can slip into obscurity under complex pressures. The disappearance of Viking Greenland challenges assumptions about resilience and adaptation. These were communities that mastered new landscapes, constructed urbanized settlements in extreme conditions, and maintained networks across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Yet, even such ingenuity proved insufficient to secure survival in the face of intersecting environmental, social, and economic stressors. The ruins remind us that human societies are never immune to change, and that the gap between continuity and disappearance can be narrower than we imagine, and still the mystery persists. What knowledge, traditions, and social structures were lost when the settlements were abandoned? How did the Greenland Vikings perceive the challenges they faced, and what strategies did they employ before finally departing? Were there records, letters, or oral histories that never survived? Could evidence still lie beneath layers of ice, soil, and moss, waiting to reveal the final chapters of this civilization? Standing on the fjord's edge, looking across the ice-scattered waters to distant peaks, one senses the fragility of human endeavor against the forces of nature and time. The disappearance of Viking Greenland is a story of adaptation, struggle, and eventual vanishing, a story that resonates across other prehistoric and historic collapses we have explored. Its silence is both haunting and compelling, inviting reflection on the limits of resilience and the mysteries that endure in remote corners of the world. The story of Greenland's Norse settlements reminds us that history is not always linear or complete. It is filled with gaps, pauses, and enigmatic disappearances that challenge our understanding of human societies. And as we continue our exploration of prehistoric time gaps beyond human understanding, the vanished communities of Greenland stand as a testament to both the ingenuity and the vulnerability of civilization. What lies still hidden beneath ice and soil, waiting to illuminate the lives, choices, and fates of those early settlers, remains an invitation to wonder, investigate, and imagine. From the frozen fjords and vanished settlements of Viking Greenland, our journey now sweeps southeast across the European continent, to the rolling plains and chalky hills of southern England. Here, atop the windswept Salisbury Plain, rise the massive stones of Stonehenge, monoliths that have stood for millennia, silent and enigmatic, enduring wind, rain, and the slow passage of time. The massive sarsen stones and smaller bluestones are aligned in circular patterns, their placements deliberate, their purpose partially understood, yet the gaps in construction, chronology, and intent continue to challenge scholars and visitors alike. Stonehenge is a place of awe, where the human urge to build, to mark the sky and the earth, confronts the mysteries of time. Stonehenge was not built in a single moment, but in phases spanning more than a millennium. Archaeological evidence suggests initial activity in the area began around 3100 BC, with simple earthworks, timber posts, and burial mounds. The first stones appeared centuries later, and even the arrangement of these megaliths underwent several major reconstructions, culminating in the sarsen circle and trilithons erected around 2500 BC. Yet within this carefully layered narrative lies a profound enigma. Significant gaps in construction suggest pauses, interruptions, or unknown events that delayed or reshaped the monument's development. These gaps challenge conventional interpretations of prehistoric society as continuous and orderly. What might these interruptions reveal about the people who built Stonehenge? Were they responding to environmental pressures, shifting social structures, or ideological changes? Evidence suggests that the monument was part of a broader ritual landscape, connected to nearby henges, barrows, and sacred sites. Yet why would communities, apparently capable of moving massive stones over tens of kilometers, halt construction for decades or even centuries before resuming with renewed ambition? Did these pauses represent resource shortages, social upheaval, or deliberate planning that reflected astronomical or ceremonial needs we no longer fully understand? The logistics alone are extraordinary. Some stones, particularly the blue stones, were transported from the Preseli Hills in what is now Wales, over 200 kilometers away. How did Neolithic engineers, using only simple tools and sledges, manage such feats of planning and labor? And yet, the archaeological record shows pauses in stone transport and placement. Some blue stones were erected, moved, or rearranged multiple times. Why did these communities expend immense effort only to interrupt or modify their work repeatedly? Was it due to changing leadership, ritual requirements, or practical challenges in construction? The silence of the past leaves these questions largely unanswered. Mainstream explanations often emphasize social and environmental factors. The Neolithic societies of Britain were complex and interconnected, yet vulnerable to climatic shifts, crop failure, or demographic changes. Could a poor harvest, population movement, or conflict have temporarily halted construction? Alternatively, might evolving social structures, religious practices, or political hierarchies have required a pause in work, as new leaders or priestly classes asserted influence over ritual sites? Archaeological evidence of temporary settlements near the henge suggests intermittent activity, supporting the idea of a community that came together periodically, rather than a permanent, continuously active workforce. Speculative interpretations add further layers of intrigue. Some researchers suggest that astronomical observations, alignments with solstices, lunar cycles, or eclipses, may have dictated the timing of construction phases. Could the gaps reflect periods of observation, planning, or ceremonial significance that modern scholars cannot fully decode? Others propose that Stonehenge may have functioned as a central node in an oral tradition of knowledge, with pauses reflecting the transmission of cultural, spiritual, or practical information between generations. Even more speculative theories explore ritualized behavior, celestial mapping, or geomantic principles that guided construction in ways now obscured by time. The physical landscape itself enhances the sense of mystery. Standing within the Sarsen Circle, one can imagine Neolithic communities laboring in waves, hauling stones, carving surfaces, and performing rituals at dawn or dusk. Surrounding barrows, earthworks, and avenues hint at a complex sacred geography, where each phase of construction may have been embedded in a network of ceremony, social negotiation, and cosmological understanding. Yet across this landscape, the pauses and discontinuities in construction suggest that Stonehenge was not a static monument, but a dynamic, evolving project shaped by factors, social, environmental, and perhaps even mystical, that remain partially hidden. The gaps in Stonehenge's construction also remind us of the fragility of historical memory. Unlike later civilizations, Neolithic communities left no written records, and our interpretations rely on fragments, post holes, charred remains, pottery shards, and the stones themselves. The pauses between phases, the repositioning of stones, and the changing scale of construction suggest a society negotiating both human and natural constraints. They reflect ambition and ingenuity, but also vulnerability, and the possibility that large-scale undertakings, even when successful, are never immune to interruption. And yet, within this silence, there is continuity and resonance. The repeated phases of construction imply long-term cultural memory, the transmission of skills and ritual knowledge across generations, and a commitment to a monumental vision that spanned centuries. Stonehenge was not merely a building project, but a statement of human endurance, creativity, and connection with the cosmos. A narrative played out over time, punctuated by gaps that speak as loudly as the stones themselves. Questions remain. Why did certain stones remain unplaced for decades or centuries? What events, unseen by modern observers, dictated the timing and scale of construction? Could lost rituals, social negotiations, or environmental crises have been encoded in these pauses? And what other mysteries lie buried beneath the surface, hidden in the arrangement of stones, the surrounding landscape, or the layers of soil yet to be excavated? Stonehenge challenges assumptions about continuity, progress, and the nature of prehistoric human endeavor, leaving us to wonder not only how it was built, but why its creation unfolded in such enigmatic rhythms. As we stand at the edge of the circle, observing the interplay of shadow and light across the stones, we sense the passage of time in a tangible way. The gaps between construction phases are more than chronological. They are reminders that history is rarely seamless, that human effort is shaped by forces both seen and unseen, and that the prehistoric past contains puzzles that endure despite centuries of study. Stonehenge continues to draw us into its mystery, inviting reflection, awe, and curiosity about what might still lie hidden beneath its silent stones. The story of Stonehenge's construction gaps reinforces a central theme of our journey through prehistoric time. The gaps themselves are as instructive as the artifacts. They remind us that human civilizations, no matter how ingenious, are subject to interruption, adaptation, and transformation. And they invite us to consider the unseen forces, environmental, social, and perhaps spiritual, that shaped human endeavor long before written history. What secrets remain locked in the earth beneath Salisbury Plain? What knowledge, ritual, or social practice has been lost, waiting to be rediscovered? And how might uncovering these truths reshape our understanding of prehistoric human ambition and the enduring mysteries of the ancient world? From the windswept plains and enigmatic stones of Salisbury, our exploration now turns far across the Atlantic to the arid deserts of southern Peru. Here, beneath the searing sun and above the vast, flat expanses of the Nazca Desert, lie patterns that can only truly be comprehended from the air. Thousands of straight lines, geometric shapes, and enormous animal and human figures etched into the earth. These are the Nazca lines, an enduring enigma of scale, precision, and intent. Viewed from ground level, they seem like shallow scratches on the desert floor. From above, their full form emerges, revealing serpents, monkeys, hummingbirds, and intricate spirals stretching hundreds of meters. They are both magnificent and unsettling, a whisper from the past whose meaning continues to elude us. The Nazca lines were created by the Nazca culture, which flourished between roughly 200 BC and 600 AD. Using simple tools, string, and careful measurement, these ancient peoples removed the reddish-brown surface stones to reveal lighter sand beneath, forming designs that have endured for centuries in an exceptionally dry, stable environment. The sheer scale of some figures, spanning hundreds of meters, suggests meticulous planning, coordination, and knowledge of geometry and observation. Yet despite these remarkable achievements, questions abound. Why did the Nazca people invest so much effort in creating designs visible only from the sky? What cultural, spiritual, or practical purposes motivated this extraordinary work? Mainstream interpretations suggest ritual and ceremonial significance. Many researchers believe the lines were related to water, fertility, and agricultural cycles, vital concerns in an arid environment where survival depended on careful management of scarce resources. Some lines appear to align with mountain peaks, solstices, or other astronomical markers, suggesting they could have served as calendars or observatories. Others propose that the geoglyphs functioned as ceremonial pathways, walked during religious rites to honor deities and ensure rainfall or harvest. Yet, while these explanations are plausible, they do not fully account for the precision, scale, and enduring visibility of the geoglyphs, nor do they explain why some forms, particularly animals and humans, seem almost symbolic rather than functional. The construction of the lines itself raises questions about logistics, planning, and social organization. How did the Nazca measure, map, and maintain proportion across figures hundreds of meters long without aerial vantage points? Could they have relied on scaffolding, elevated platforms, or observational towers, now vanished, to achieve such precision? Were multiple generations involved, with knowledge transmitted orally or through apprenticeship? And what motivated sustained labor on designs whose immediate utility is not obvious, but whose meaning seems both public and esoteric? These practical questions intersect with deeper mysteries, highlighting the intersection of human ingenuity and unresolved intent. Speculative interpretations further amplify the intrigue. Some researchers have suggested that the figures could have served as signals for deities or celestial beings meant to be seen from above, perhaps by the gods themselves rather than humans. Others have hypothesized lost knowledge or techniques of observation, surveying, or measurement, now irretrievably lost. Fringe theories propose astronomical messages, alien interaction, or encoded information, yet the more grounded perspective emphasizes gaps in understanding the cultural, spiritual, and symbolic logic of the Nazca people. What we do know is that the lines were labor-intensive, deliberate, and integral to the social fabric of the Nazca civilization, yet their ultimate meaning remains tantalizingly beyond reach. The desert landscape itself reinforces the sense of mystery. Walking among the lines today, one can sense both the human effort required and the vastness of the environment in which they were created. The land stretches uninterrupted, its surface flat and unyielding, punctuated only by distant mountains and ridges. Weathered stones mark the outlines of figures, and soil preserved by extreme dryness holds traces of human activity. Yet despite centuries of study, we encounter only fragments of understanding. Aerial photography, ground surveys, and satellite imagery reveal patterns, but the intentions behind them remain speculative. The scale, distribution, and repeated motifs suggest a culture with a highly developed visual and symbolic language, much of which has been lost to time. The Nazca lines also raise broader questions about human creativity, societal organization, and the passage of knowledge. The effort required to construct these geoglyphs implies social cohesion, coordination, and shared purpose. It suggests that the Nazca people were capable of mobilizing labor, maintaining ritual and symbolic continuity, and embedding meaning across generations. And yet, the gaps in understanding, both in why specific figures were chosen and why their designs were distributed across the desert in particular patterns, highlight how much about prehistoric societies remains invisible. These lines are a testament not only to the people who created them, but also to the mysteries that endure in the archaeological record. Environmental and cultural pressures may have shaped the creation and maintenance of the geoglyphs. The Nazca Desert, hyper-arid and protected from major flooding, preserved these designs for centuries. Yet even small shifts in climate, erosion, or human interference could have altered their visibility and meaning. Were some lines abandoned mid-construction due to social upheaval, drought, or migration? Did shifts in leadership, religious practice, or population distribution influence which figures were completed and which were left unfinished? Each interruption and variation in the patterns hints at human stories now lost, moments of decision, effort, and perhaps ritual pause that remain hidden beneath the desert's surface. And still, the lines evoke questions that go beyond practicality or ritual. Why choose such a scale and perspective that can only be fully appreciated from the air, an aerial vantage unavailable in the pre-Columbian era? Could the purpose have been symbolic, intended for gods, spirits, or the mind's eye rather than literal observers? Were the geometric shapes, spirals, and animals part of a visual language, a ritualized code, or a cosmological map whose grammar and syntax we no longer understand? The more we study, the more we recognize the depth of human imagination and the magnitude of the cultural gaps left behind. Walking across the desert today, observing the blunted outlines of hummingbirds, monkeys, and serpents etched into the sand, one senses both continuity and silence. These were communities engaged with the land, the sky, and unseen forces, whose knowledge and symbolic language were carefully embedded in the earth. Yet, the purpose, timing, and full cultural context remain tantalizingly elusive. The Nazca lines are not merely artistic or scientific feats. They are manifestations of human intent, imagination, and belief, preserved in a landscape that has both nurtured and concealed them for millennia. As we contemplate the Nazca lines, we are confronted by the profound gaps in human knowledge that span continents and epochs. The lines, like Stonehenge, Viking Greenland, and the Indus Valley, invite reflection on human ambition, ingenuity, and vulnerability. They remind us that civilizations leave traces that are sometimes incomplete, enigmatic, or preserved in ways that challenge modern interpretation. And as we continue to explore prehistoric time gaps beyond human understanding, the Nazca geoglyphs stand as a testament to both the extraordinary capabilities of ancient peoples and the enduring mysteries that await discovery. What still lies hidden beneath the sands, waiting to reveal lost techniques, cultural meanings, or symbolic connections? How much of the Nazca worldview, their religious and social systems, and their understanding of the cosmos has vanished along with the people who created these lines? And how might uncovering these secrets reshape our understanding of the prehistoric mind, human creativity, and the silent landscapes left by civilizations long gone? These questions remain unanswered, yet it is precisely this uncertainty that draws us deeper into the desert, into the patterns of stone and sand, and into the human story still waiting to be fully understood. From the arid sands and enigmatic geoglyphs of the Nazca Desert, our journey now moves across the globe, eastward to the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River in what is now the United States. Here, beneath verdant forests and gently rolling plains, lie the remnants of Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its height, Cahokia was a bustling metropolis of thousands, with monumental earthen mounds, plazas, and extensive residential areas. Yet by the 14th century, this once thriving center had been largely abandoned. The story of its rise and decline presents a profound puzzle, one that challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian societies and the fragility of complex civilizations. Cahokia flourished between approximately 1050 and 1350 AD, strategically located near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers. Its central precinct included Monk's Mound, an immense earthwork rising over 30 meters high, alongside dozens of smaller platform mounds, ceremonial plazas, and residential compounds. The city was home to tens of thousands, organized into a hierarchical society with a complex system of governance, ritual, and trade. Artifacts indicate connections spanning hundreds of kilometers, from obsidian in the Rocky Mountains to marine shells from the Gulf of Mexico, revealing a network of commerce and cultural exchange. Cahokia's scale, sophistication, and reach make its eventual decline all the more enigmatic. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid yet incomplete picture. Streets and plazas were meticulously organized, houses arranged in semi-regular patterns, and the layout suggests careful planning and social coordination. The mounds themselves, constructed from compacted earth, required immense labor over generations, reflecting both civic and spiritual priorities. Yet within this apparent order, subtle signs of stress appear in the archaeological record. Shifting settlement patterns, evidence of resource pressure, and indications of social tension. By the 14th century, many mounds were abandoned. Residential compounds fell into disrepair, and the city's population dispersed. What precipitated this transformation from a vibrant urban center to near desolation? Mainstream interpretations point to environmental and climatic factors. The late medieval warm period gave way to a period of cooling, erratic rainfall, and flooding, which may have disrupted agriculture. Corn, a staple of Cahokia's diet, is sensitive to climatic variation, and prolonged droughts or repeated floods could have strained food production. Soil analyses indicate signs of overuse and depletion, suggesting that intensive agriculture to support large urban populations may have reached ecological limits. Could environmental degradation and climate volatility have combined to create conditions that made continued habitation unsustainable? Yet environmental factors alone cannot fully explain Cahokia's decline. Social and political dynamics likely played a critical role. Evidence of fortifications, palisades, and possible conflict suggests that internal or external tensions may have escalated. Population pressure, competition for resources, or challenges to elite authority could have destabilized the city. The complexity of Cahokia's social structure, reliant on coordinated labor, ritual leadership, and trade, might have rendered it vulnerable to disruption. If central authority weakened, the entire urban system could have faltered, leading to depopulation or migration. Speculative interpretations add further layers of intrigue. Could disease have contributed, spreading rapidly in dense urban conditions and decimating the population? Might shifts in religious practice or ritual significance have influenced decisions to abandon ceremonial centers? Some researchers propose that Cahokia's decline was gradual and multi-causal, with climate, resource depletion, social conflict, and possibly ideological shifts intersecting in ways that left the city increasingly fragile. Unlike civilizations with written records, the Mississippian culture provides no direct account, leaving only artifacts, mounds, and soil layers to hint at human decisions and responses. The physical landscape itself evokes both grandeur and loss. Monk's Mound towers over the plains, its terraces shaped by human hands over centuries. Smaller mounds, now eroded or partially excavated, hint at plazas, ceremonial spaces, and residences once teeming with life. Post holes, storage pits, and remnants of palisades speak to a community that invested labor, knowledge, and spiritual focus into creating an ordered and meaningful environment. Yet, the silence is striking. Today, wind sweeps across open fields, deer wander through overgrown terraces, and the absence of permanent habitation underscores the abruptness of Cahokia's transformation from an urban hub to a ghostly landscape. The scale of the city and its sudden decline raise questions about societal resilience and human adaptability. How could a society capable of organizing tens of thousands of people, constructing massive earthworks, and maintaining trade networks over hundreds of kilometers fall into apparent collapse? Did the population disperse gradually into smaller, less centralized communities, or was abandonment sudden, driven by acute environmental or social crises? And what knowledge, traditions, and social structures were lost when Cahokia's plazas emptied and its mounds fell silent? Cahokia also reminds us that human ingenuity is often matched by fragility. The city demonstrates remarkable understanding of urban planning, hydraulics, and agriculture. Yet even this expertise could not fully mitigate climatic variability or social pressures. Its decline underscores a recurrent theme we have observed in other prehistoric time gaps. Societies, no matter how sophisticated, can leave behind monumental traces, even as their social fabric frays and populations vanish. The contrast between the visible remnants and the silence in between evokes both awe and unease. Speculation continues. Some researchers consider the possibility that the decline of Cahokia coincided with regional population shifts, migrations, or even cultural transformations that left the city depopulated but allowed the broader Mississippian culture to persist elsewhere. Others suggest that internal ideological or ritual changes, perhaps a reorganization of ceremonial priorities, played a subtle yet decisive role. Could the abandonment of urban centers have been a conscious choice, reflecting evolving cultural paradigms rather than simply failure? These questions highlight the complexity of interpreting human behavior across time and the gaps that persist in the archaeological record. Walking among the mounds today, one is struck by both achievement and absence. The scale of construction, the labor required, and the coordination implied by city layout speak to a civilization of extraordinary capability. Yet the lack of continuity, the disappearance of households, and the fading of cultural practices remind us that civilization is always contingent, always vulnerable to forces beyond human control. Cahokia's story is not simply one of collapse. It is a meditation on the intersection of human ambition, environmental limits, and the gaps in history that leave us searching for answers. And still, mysteries endure. What precise sequence of events led to the city's depopulation? What social, climatic, or ecological thresholds were crossed that prompted communities to leave? How much knowledge, engineering, agricultural, ritualistic, was lost with the dispersal of its people? And how might uncovering these answers reshape our understanding of human resilience, urban complexity, and the vulnerabilities of societies both ancient and modern? Cahokia, like the Nazca lines, Stonehenge, Viking Greenland, and the Indus Valley, offers both evidence and silence, achievement and disappearance, inviting us to ponder the fragile balance between human ingenuity and the unpredictable rhythms of the natural world. As we contemplate the earthen mounds rising from the Mississippi floodplain, we are reminded that prehistoric time is punctuated not only by remarkable constructions and urban ingenuity, but also by abrupt silences and enigmatic declines. Cahokia challenges us to reconcile the extraordinary with the mysterious, to recognize the gaps in human understanding, and to remain open to the stories that lie hidden beneath layers of soil, memory, and time. The city's decline is more than a historical event. It is an enduring invitation to explore, question, and reflect on the patterns, vulnerabilities, and enduring enigmas of prehistoric civilizations. From the sprawling earthen mounds of Cahokia, where human ambition once met the winding rivers of North America, our exploration now carries us to the remote reaches of the South Pacific. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, emerges from the vast expanse of ocean like a solitary gem, a volcanic outcrop of cliffs, beaches, and rolling hills. The island's isolation is profound. More than 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continental landmass, yet despite this remoteness, it was once home to a thriving society capable of feats of engineering and artistry that continue to captivate scholars and visitors alike. Today, the island is best known for its iconic moai, monolithic statues with oversized heads and enigmatic expressions, silent witnesses to a civilization that mysteriously declined. The Rapa Nui civilization is believed to have been established around the first millennium AD, reaching its peak between 1200 and 1500 AD. At that time, the island supported a population possibly exceeding 10,000 individuals, organized into distinct clans and settlements. Communities built stone platforms, ceremonial sites, and, most famously, the moai, some of which weigh more than 80 tons. The logistics of carving, transporting, and erecting these statues required coordination, skill, and sustained effort across generations. Yet, despite this ingenuity and societal cohesion, the population experienced a dramatic decline in the centuries following its peak. By the time Europeans arrived in the 18th century, the island's society was a fraction of its former size, and much of its cultural landscape had been disrupted. Archaeological evidence suggests that multiple factors contributed to this decline, yet none offers a definitive explanation. Environmental studies indicate that deforestation and soil erosion played a central role. Pollen analyses reveal a dramatic reduction in palm tree populations, which had once covered much of the island, providing material for construction, fuel, and possibly transport of the moai. How did the loss of these resources affect daily life, agriculture, and long-distance trade among clans? Could the removal of forests have undermined the island's capacity to sustain a large population, creating a slow cascade of societal stress? These environmental pressures, compounded over centuries, may have destabilized even a resilient community. Social dynamics also emerge as critical considerations. The construction of moai and ceremonial platforms, while culturally and spiritually significant, required intensive labor. Could competition among clans for prestige, territory, or ritual dominance have strained resources and heightened social tension? Evidence of fortifications, conflict, and occasional skeletal trauma points to episodes of internal violence. Perhaps disputes over limited arable land, dwindling timber supplies, or access to ceremonial sites intensified social fragmentation. In this sense, the decline may reflect a complex interplay between environmental scarcity and human behavior, a pattern echoed in other prehistoric societies we have explored. Yet, the Rapa Nui decline also invites deeper, more speculative inquiry. Some scholars propose that episodic droughts, changing ocean currents, or climatic variability may have further stressed food production and freshwater access. Others suggest that disease, introduced either through early European contact or prior inter-island interaction, could have accelerated depopulation, though evidence remains limited. Intriguingly, oral traditions hint at periods of upheaval and ritualized conflict, suggesting that societal memory preserves echoes of events that left few physical traces. How much of the population decline was gradual, and how much might have been punctuated by sudden crises? The moai themselves offer insight into both cultural achievement and the enigmas surrounding societal change. These colossal statues, carved from volcanic tuff and transported across uneven terrain, demonstrate advanced understanding of leverage, geometry, and social coordination. Yet, many statues were toppled prior to European contact, and quarry sites show signs of abandonment. Were these statues deliberately felled during interclan conflict, as some theories suggest? Or were they casualties of environmental constraints and declining social cohesion, left unfinished as resources and manpower dwindled? Each standing or fallen moai tells a fragment of a story, yet the narrative remains incomplete. The physical landscape of Easter Island deepens the sense of mystery. Steep cliffs rise along the coastline, providing natural fortifications, while inland slopes once supported extensive gardens and stone enclosures. Today, the island bears scars of human activity. Eroded paths, terraced fields, and remnants of stone dwellings suggest labor-intensive habitation. Yet the silence is palpable. Where once ceremonial centers and villages hummed with activity, now only wind, seabirds, and the occasional visitor occupy the space. The contrast between monumental achievement and absence underscores the fragility of complex societies, even those that appear self-sufficient and ingeniously adapted. Speculative theories continue to capture the imagination. Could the decline have been influenced by external contact, such as early Polynesian voyaging or trade disruptions? Did the loss of forest cover trigger cascading ecological failures, reducing food security, fuel, and transport? Some propose that shifts in ritual practice, social hierarchy, or religious focus altered labor priorities, contributing to depopulation. Unlike civilizations with written records, the Rapa Nui provide no direct narrative. We must infer intention and causality from material remains, environmental data, and oral tradition, leaving gaps that may never be fully bridged. The story of Easter Island also highlights a recurring theme in human history. Societies that achieve extraordinary feats of coordination, engineering, and cultural expression are still vulnerable to environmental, social, and external pressures. The rise and decline of the Rapa Nui civilization mirrors patterns seen in Cahokia, the Indus Valley, Viking Greenland, and the Nazca Desert. Monumental effort, innovation, and planning can coexist with fragility, and societal continuity is never guaranteed. The gaps in knowledge, why the population fell, how social cohesion eroded, what knowledge was lost, invite reflection on the limits of human adaptation and the mysteries that endure in isolated or extreme environments. Walking among the Moai today, one senses both human creativity and silence. The statues, some gazing inland, others facing the ocean, suggest vigilance, reverence, or watchfulness. Yet they also bear witness to absence. Their presence asks us to consider not only the skill and vision of the people who erected them, but also the forces that led to their society's contraction. What decisions were made in the face of scarcity? What rituals, traditions, or knowledge were abandoned or transformed? And what might lie hidden beneath the volcanic soil, preserving untold stories of adaptation, survival, and social negotiation? Even as the wind sweeps across the island's volcanic ridges and eroded terraces, the mysteries of Easter Island persist. How did a society so distant from other large civilizations manage to thrive for centuries, only to experience dramatic decline? What knowledge, technical, agricultural, spiritual, was lost along with the population, and how might those lessons inform our understanding of human resilience and vulnerability? The gaps in chronology, population, and cultural memory remind us that history is not seamless, that even the most isolated societies face pressures that can leave them suddenly or gradually diminished. Easter Island's population decline, like the collapses and absences we have explored elsewhere, challenges us to think beyond the visible traces of human achievement. It asks us to consider the invisible threads, environmental shifts, social tensions, ritual imperatives, and ecological limitations that shape human history. And it invites us to continue probing, imagining, and questioning, for the answers remain hidden beneath volcanic soil, etched into the stones, and whispered in the island's oral memory. What secrets of survival, adaptation, and societal transformation remain buried here, waiting to be revealed? How might uncovering them deepen our understanding of the prehistoric past, the fragility of human societies, and the enduring enigmas that connect civilizations across time and space? From the isolated cliffs and silent Moai of Easter Island, our journey now shifts across continents and oceans to the temperate landscapes of Britain, a land of rolling hills, dense forests, and windswept coasts. For nearly 4 centuries, this island bore the mark of one of the most powerful empires in human history: Rome. Roads, villas, forts, and Hadrian's Wall attest to Roman occupation, a period of profound engineering, administration, and cultural transformation. Yet, as suddenly as Rome had arrived, it withdrew, leaving behind a landscape rich in physical legacy but sparse in documentation of the transition. The withdrawal of Roman forces and administration in the early 5th century AD remains a puzzle, a moment where imperial ambition receded, leaving Britain to navigate an uncertain and fragmented future. Roman Britain, or Britannia as it was known to the empire, had been integrated into Roman networks of trade, governance, and military command since the invasion of AD 43. Cities such as Londinium, Verulamium, and Iberacum flourished with stone roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters, and bathhouses. Forts dotted the landscape, strategically positioned to defend against northern tribes and to maintain control over a territory that stretched from the Channel coast to the Scottish borders. Archaeological evidence reveals complex rural settlements, villa estates, and industrial centers, indicating a sophisticated economy and society deeply connected to the broader Roman world. Yet, by the early 5th century, this network of infrastructure, governance, and social cohesion began to unravel. The process of withdrawal was gradual but decisive. Roman legions, once a formidable presence along Hadrian's Wall and frontier forts, were recalled to the continent to respond to crises elsewhere in the empire. Provincial governors and administrative officers left, dismantling the centralized mechanisms of taxation, law, and military enforcement. Without these structures, Britain's urban centers, roads, and fortifications remained, but the social and political cohesion that had maintained them disintegrated. How did local populations adapt to the sudden absence of imperial authority? What forces, political, economic, or environmental, shaped the decisions of Roman leaders and the responses of Britons left in the wake of the empire? Mainstream interpretations emphasize a combination of external pressures and internal decay. Rome, beset by barbarian invasions, political instability, and economic strain across the continent, could no longer maintain distant provinces such as Britain. In this light, withdrawal was pragmatic. The empire prioritized areas of strategic importance, leaving peripheral territories to fend for themselves. Local Britons, some Romanized and others less so, faced immediate challenges: defending settlements, maintaining roads and aqueducts, and sustaining agricultural production. The rapid removal of centralized administration likely created power vacuums, spurring local leaders to consolidate control or contend with rival factions. Yet the archaeological and historical record reveals anomalies that provoke deeper questions. Evidence suggests continuity in certain settlements, with some villas and towns remaining inhabited and functional well beyond the official departure of Roman authorities. Coins, pottery, and imported goods continued to circulate, hinting at persistent trade or cultural influence, even as centralized oversight vanished. Could these threads of continuity indicate that Roman influence persisted in subtle ways, maintained by local elites or communal institutions? And if so, why did such continuity fail to prevent the eventual fragmentation of society into smaller, isolated polities? Speculative interpretations invite further reflection. Some scholars propose that the withdrawal triggered not merely political or economic disruption, but also social and psychological upheaval. Communities accustomed to the order, security, and ritualized authority of Rome may have struggled to redefine governance, identity, and cohesion. Might local Britons have experienced a period of experimentation with leadership structures, trade networks, and cultural practices, leaving gaps in the record where human adaptation took place but left little tangible trace? Could environmental pressures, such as shifting climate, poor harvests, or deforestation, have compounded the challenges of this transition, shaping migration patterns and settlement choices? The physical remnants of Roman Britain amplify the sense of mystery. Hadrian's Wall, stretching across northern England, now rises in fragmented stones, once a formidable barrier and symbol of imperial authority. Forts, once bustling with soldiers, stand as silent witnesses to military organization and societal control. Villas, some partially excavated, reveal domestic life and luxury, while the surrounding countryside hints at agricultural strategies designed to sustain urban populations. Yet these structures alone cannot explain the human experience of withdrawal. The fears, strategies, and adaptations of communities suddenly left to their own devices remain largely invisible. Even more intriguing are the gaps in continuity that emerge across Britain. Some towns declined rapidly, while others persisted in a limited capacity. Rural populations seem to have shifted, consolidating in defensible locations or dispersing into smaller, self-sufficient hamlets. Trade networks contracted, yet evidence of imported goods and cultural practices continued sporadically, suggesting a patchwork of adaptation and resilience. These uneven patterns raise questions about the mechanisms of societal memory and knowledge transmission. How did Britons retain technical skills, agricultural expertise, or cultural practices when formal structures disappeared? And what knowledge was lost entirely, leaving only the stones, roads, and scattered artifacts to hint at a vanished administrative order? The withdrawal also poses broader questions about the nature of human adaptation to systemic shocks. Roman Britain exemplifies the fragility of complex societies. A well-organized, technologically advanced society capable of monumental engineering could dissolve under the strain of external and internal pressures. Yet within this collapse lies evidence of resilience. Communities adapted, sometimes successfully, sometimes partially, to maintain settlements, defend resources, and navigate a rapidly shifting social landscape. These adaptations, however, occurred in ways that leave gaps, silent periods, and anomalies in the archaeological record. Moments where the story of human action is invisible, yet profoundly consequential. Speculative perspectives continue to enrich the narrative. Some researchers consider the possibility of coordinated local resistance or negotiation with remaining Roman officers, shaping the timing and manner of withdrawal. Others suggest that religious or cultural transformations, including the spread of Christianity, may have influenced social cohesion and settlement patterns. Still, the record remains incomplete. Unlike later periods with abundant documentation, the human experience of this transitional century is fragmented, leaving us to infer motives, decisions, and outcomes from material traces and scattered writings. Walking through the remnants of Roman Britain today, one senses both achievement and absence. Roads, walls, and villas speak of engineering skill, urban planning, and governance. Yet their emptiness, their eroded and repurposed stones, remind us of the impermanence of human structures in the face of systemic change. The withdrawal of Rome was not simply a political event. It was a human experience marked by adaptation, uncertainty, and transformation. It echoes patterns seen elsewhere, from Easter Island to Cahokia, where remarkable societies faced abrupt shifts, leaving gaps that invite inquiry and reflection. As we contemplate the landscape of post-Roman Britain, questions emerge that resonate with broader themes of prehistoric time gaps. How did communities negotiate the loss of centralized authority? Which social structures endured, and which were abandoned or transformed? What knowledge, ritual, or cultural practice was lost, and how much persisted in subtle forms? And most compellingly, what invisible dynamics, social, environmental, psychological, shaped the centuries-long transition from Roman order to fragmented post-imperial society? These gaps, like the voids left in other ancient civilizations, remind us that human history is punctuated not only by creation and construction, but also by withdrawal, absence, and the profound mysteries of societal adaptation. Roman Britain's withdrawal thus stands as a testament to both human ingenuity and vulnerability. It demonstrates how complex societies, capable of extraordinary feats, remain subject to forces beyond immediate control, military, environmental, and social. And it challenges us to read between the lines of stone and soil, to trace the invisible threads of adaptation, continuity, and disappearance, and to consider how the rhythms of human endeavor leave gaps as instructive as the monuments themselves. What lies hidden in the centuries after Rome's departure? Which stories, practices, and knowledge were lost to time, and how might uncovering them reshape our understanding of human resilience, societal fragility, and the enduring enigmas of history? From the eroded walls and abandoned villas of post-Roman Britain, our journey now carries us across the Atlantic to the dramatic mesas, canyons, and desert plateaus of the American Southwest. Here, in the high deserts of what is now the Four Corners region, the land is carved by rivers and wind into cliffs, terraces, and broad, arid plains. It is in these rugged landscapes that the ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Anasazi, once thrived, constructing remarkable settlements that defy both time and imagination. Multi-storied dwellings cling to cliff faces, ceremonial kivas descend into the earth like hidden chambers, and vast villages stretch across plateaus, revealing a civilization of ingenuity, adaptation, and sophisticated social organization. Yet, by the late 13th century, much of this civilization had been abandoned, leaving silent pueblos, empty ceremonial spaces, and profound mysteries about the forces that drove these people from the land they had meticulously cultivated and transformed. The ancestral Puebloans developed a civilization finely tuned to the demands of their environment. Between approximately 700 and 1300 AD, they built complex communities such as Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and Canyon de Chelly, each a testament to architectural ingenuity, social organization, and ceremonial sophistication. Massive stone walls, cliff dwellings perched precariously above canyon floors, and interconnected road systems reflect a society capable of remarkable coordination and planning. Archaeologists have documented extensive agricultural terraces, check dams, and irrigation channels, demonstrating a deep understanding of water management and soil conservation, crucial adaptations for survival in a semi-arid landscape prone to seasonal droughts. The ancestral Puebloans also left behind finely crafted pottery, textiles, and ceremonial objects, alongside astronomical alignments within kivas and great houses, suggesting sophisticated cosmological knowledge and ritual practice. Yet the flourishing of these communities abruptly transitions into evidence of decline and abandonment, a phenomenon that continues to fascinate researchers. Tree ring data indicates prolonged periods of drought in the late 1200s, suggesting that water scarcity and failed crops may have placed extraordinary stress on agricultural systems. Soil analyses reveal signs of depletion and erosion, hinting that centuries of intensive cultivation had diminished the fertility of fields once relied upon to sustain dense populations. Could such environmental pressures alone account for the depopulation of entire villages, or did they merely exacerbate underlying social, political, or religious tensions? What decisions did communities face when their staples failed and the rhythms of ritual, agriculture, and social cohesion were threatened simultaneously? Social and political structures likely magnified these pressures. The ancestral Puebloans organized themselves into intricate networks of clans and settlements, yet the archaeological record suggests that competition, social stratification, and resource management challenges may have generated internal strain. Evidence of partially abandoned or unfinished structures, abrupt cessation of construction projects, and the relocation of families over considerable distances implies strategic, though perhaps desperate, responses to environmental and social stressors. Did clans negotiate migrations together, or were movements fragmented, occurring in smaller groups seeking more sustainable lands? How did the loss of central ceremonial centers, hubs of social and religious authority, affect cohesion and identity? Speculative interpretations offer additional layers of intrigue. Some researchers propose that ritual or ideological transformations may have influenced decisions to relocate. Could shifts in spiritual beliefs, leadership hierarchies, or ceremonial priorities have prompted the deliberate abandonment of ancestral dwellings and kivas? Others suggest that conflict, whether internal or with neighboring groups, may have created additional pressures, though physical evidence of warfare is subtle and often ambiguous. Natural disasters too, flash floods, landslides, or seismic events, may have contributed to localized abandonment, creating patterns that appear sudden yet are the result of cumulative risk and vulnerability. The landscape itself deepens the sense of mystery. Walking along the cliff edges of Mesa Verde, one can gaze down at multi-level dwellings perched hundreds of feet above canyon floors, their stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Kivas, once centers of communal and spiritual life, are empty. Ceremonial plazas are overgrown, yet their alignment and architecture speak of sophisticated planning and ritual practice. Roads once connected distant settlements, now eroded and fading into the desert. The contrast between monumental human effort and the subsequent silence of these spaces evokes both awe and unease. A civilization capable of remarkable feats, now absent, leaving only stone, soil, and faint traces of life to tell its story. Trade and cultural continuity also raise questions. Despite environmental stress, artifacts indicate that long-distance trade persisted, with shells, turquoise, and other materials moving across vast distances. How did these networks function during times of crisis? Could they have facilitated survival or delayed depopulation, or were they insufficient to counteract ecological and social pressures? These questions underscore the gaps in understanding, reminding us that material evidence reveals fragments of behavior, but seldom fully illuminates intention, decision-making, or experience. Abandonment patterns themselves are puzzling. Some sites show gradual decline, with populations relocating in stages, while others suggest more abrupt exodus, leaving dwellings intact but empty. Did these patterns reflect local environmental variation, social strategy, or unforeseen calamities? And what became of the people themselves? Evidence of migration points to movement southward and westward, yet the destinations, scale, and long-term impacts of these relocations remain only partially understood. What knowledge, tradition, and social structures were carried forward, and which were irrevocably lost? The story of the ancestral Puebloans, like that of Cahokia, Easter Island, and Roman Britain, highlights both human ingenuity and vulnerability. Complex societies, even those with deep environmental knowledge and sophisticated social networks, remain susceptible to forces, climatic, ecological, social, and ideological, that can precipitate decline. Yet the gaps left behind are as instructive as the structures themselves, offering glimpses into resilience, adaptation, and the limits of human capacity in the face of change. As we explore these abandoned settlements, the questions remain open. How did communities navigate the interplay of drought, social tension, and spiritual obligation? Were the decisions to leave deliberate, gradual, or forced by circumstance? What stories, rituals, and technical knowledge vanished with the Exodus, and which were preserved in new lands and settlements? And most profoundly, what does the silence of the cliffs, the empty kivas, and the overgrown terraces teach us about the ephemeral nature of human achievement and the enduring gaps in the prehistoric record? The ancestral Puebloan abandonment invites us to reflect on the delicate balance between human ingenuity and environmental reality, between social complexity and fragility. It challenges us to read the traces left in stone and soil, to imagine the human lives and decisions hidden within, and to confront the profound mysteries that remain unresolved. What lies beyond the visible structures? What lessons, lost knowledge, and untold stories are buried in the canyons and mesas, waiting for us to uncover, interpret, and understand? These gaps, silent yet compelling, continue to draw us deeper into the story of prehistoric human civilizations and the enduring enigmas that define them. Enigmas from the silent cliffs of the American Southwest, where the ancestral Puebloans once flourished and vanished, our journey now turns to the lifeblood of the ancient Nile. The river, winding like a silver ribbon through the desert sands, has sustained human civilization for millennia. Its fertile banks nurtured the pharaohs, priests, and artisans of Egypt, where monumental pyramids, temples, and tombs stand as testaments to both ingenuity and devotion. Yet even in this land of apparent permanence, history reveals a profound rupture. The First Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation, social upheaval, and enigmatic gaps in the continuity of power that followed the Old Kingdom's glory. The Old Kingdom, spanning roughly 2686 to 2181 BC, had been a period of centralized authority, monumental construction, and relative stability. Pharaohs such as Djoser and Khufu oversaw the building of colossal pyramids, organized labor forces, and maintained religious and administrative systems that reached across the Nile Valley. Hieroglyphs, administrative documents, and archaeological evidence reveal a society deeply structured, with governance, ritual, and economic networks meticulously interwoven. Yet, toward the end of the Sixth Dynasty, the Old Kingdom faltered. Monuments became less grand, regional governors, known as nomarchs, gained increasing autonomy, and inscriptions hint at growing unrest and environmental stress. By approximately 2181 BC, Egypt entered the First Intermediate Period, a century or more marked by decentralization, competing dynasties, and a landscape both physically and politically fragmented. This era presents a compelling puzzle. Archaeologists and historians have traced the causes of the collapse, but no single factor fully explains the sudden transformation. Climatic evidence suggests that prolonged periods of low Nile flooding may have undermined agriculture, threatening food security for an empire whose economy depended on the river's annual inundation. Famine, documented in contemporary inscriptions and echoed in later literary accounts, would have strained the legitimacy of pharaohs and the authority of centralized administration. Yet environmental stress alone cannot account for the complexity of societal shifts. How did regional leaders consolidate power, and to what extent did communities adapt their practices in response to scarcity? Political fragmentation becomes evident in the archaeological and textual record. Two competing dynasties emerged during this period, one in Heracleopolis in Lower Egypt, the other in Thebes in Upper Egypt. These centers of power maintained their own administrations, temples, and military forces, often vying for influence over distant regions. Evidence of fortified settlements, shifts in burial practices, and varying artistic styles suggest that authority was localized, ceremonial practices diversified, and the once unified Nile Valley became a mosaic of semi-independent polities. How did ordinary people experience this fragmentation? Did they continue traditional rituals in local shrines, or did new forms of worship emerge in response to shifting political landscapes? Social and economic transformations further complicate the picture. Artisans and scribes continued to produce works of craftsmanship and writing, yet the scale of monumental construction diminished. The iconic pyramids of the Old Kingdom gave way to smaller tombs and regional necropolises, suggesting that both labor and resources were redirected or limited. How much of this change reflects deliberate adaptation to limited means, and how much signals the breakdown of centralized planning? The contrast between the enduring skill of craftspeople and the reduction of grand state projects highlights a society negotiating continuity amid upheaval. Speculative interpretations deepen the intrigue. Some scholars propose that ideological shifts played a role, with the divine authority of the pharaoh challenged by the rising power of local elites. Temples and cults, previously under royal patronage, may have diversified, altering the balance of spiritual and political power. Others suggest that population movements, perhaps in response to famine or local conflicts, reshaped settlement patterns along the Nile and into the desert margins. Could these migrations have transmitted knowledge, rituals, and artistic practices to peripheral regions, seeding innovations that would later flourish during the Middle Kingdom? Or did they create cultural discontinuities, gaps in tradition that left future generations to reconstruct social and religious norms? Environmental evidence adds another layer of complexity. Sediment cores and paleoclimatic data suggest that the Nile experienced inconsistent flooding, producing cycles of abundance and scarcity. These environmental fluctuations would have directly impacted agriculture, taxation, and food distribution. Were local communities able to develop strategies to buffer against these stresses, or did ecological pressures compound political and social instability? Did the interplay between climate, governance, and human adaptation create patterns of settlement, abandonment, and reorganization that leave gaps in our understanding of this turbulent century? The First Intermediate Period also invites reflection on human resilience. Despite fragmentation, communities persisted, maintained cultural practices, and continued to interact through trade and ritual networks. The eventual reunification under the Middle Kingdom demonstrates both the adaptability and continuity of Egyptian civilization. Yet the century of upheaval remains a testament to the vulnerability of complex societies, even those with millennia of accumulated knowledge and administrative sophistication. What lessons can we draw from a society capable of monumental construction yet temporarily vulnerable to environmental and political pressures? How did ordinary individuals negotiate survival, identity, and belief in an era when central authority faltered? Walking along the remnants of Heracleopolitan settlements or the temples of Thebes, one can sense both human ingenuity and the fragility of order. Walls and tombs bear traces of skilled labor, yet the gaps, collapsed structures, unfinished inscriptions, and vanished monuments speak of uncertainty, adaptation, and perhaps despair. The silence of these sites invites contemplation. How do we interpret the absence left in the archaeological record? What knowledge, strategies, or cultural practices were lost to time, and what persisted in ways too subtle to leave clear traces? The First Intermediate Period, like the collapses and absences explored elsewhere, from Easter Island to Roman Britain to the ancestral Puebloans, challenges our understanding of human history. It reminds us that even civilizations that appear enduring and centralized are susceptible to environmental stress, social fragmentation, and shifts in ideology. It also underscores the limits of the historical and archaeological record. What is preserved offers glimpses, not comprehensive narratives. The gaps, the spaces between inscriptions, the empty tombs, the unfinished structures, are as instructive as the artifacts themselves, inviting us to question, interpret, and imagine the lives of those who lived through uncertainty and change. As we reflect on the First Intermediate Period, questions emerge that resonate across time and geography. How did local communities negotiate scarcity, political competition, and shifting religious landscapes? Which traditions endured, and which were abandoned or transformed? What knowledge, skill, and cultural memory vanished into the gaps left by disruption? And most compellingly, what remains hidden beneath the sands, waiting to illuminate the complex, fragile, and profoundly human story of a civilization navigating its own voids? The First Intermediate Period reminds us that history is neither linear nor seamless. Even in the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and eternal monuments, gaps persist. gaps that speak to the fragility of authority, the unpredictability of nature, and the enduring enigmas of human societies. It is in these silences, these absences, that the mysteries of the past continue to draw us, inviting us to explore not only what is visible, but also what remains hidden, waiting to be discovered, understood, and imagined. From the fragmented monuments and silent tombs of Egypt's first intermediate period, our exploration moves southward along the winding Nile, to a land both harsh and fertile, where desert meets river, and history seems to whisper through the sands. Nubia, a region stretching from the southern reaches of Egypt into modern-day Sudan, was home to civilizations as ancient, complex, and sophisticated as those of the pharaohs. Yet for millennia, much of Nubia's history has remained enigmatic, shrouded in what scholars have termed a historical silence. While Egypt left behind monumental pyramids, temples, and inscriptions, Nubia's records are comparatively sparse, its cities buried under shifting sands, its kings and cultures glimpsed only intermittently through archaeology, fragmentary texts, and occasional inscriptions. The gaps are profound, inviting speculation, interpretation, and reflection on what might be lost to time. Archaeological evidence reveals that Nubia was far from empty or passive. Sites such as Kerma, Napata, and later Meroe demonstrate advanced urban planning, monumental architecture, and thriving trade networks. Kerma, flourishing from approximately 2500 to 1500 BC, was a center of political power, trade, and culture, with large earthen structures, tumulus cemeteries, and evidence of complex social hierarchies. Artifacts suggest a society engaged in metallurgy, agriculture, and craft production, interacting with neighboring Egypt yet maintaining distinctive cultural practices. Despite this richness, much about Nubian society remains obscure, leaving historians to ask, why does the historical record feel so fragmented? Egyptian texts offer tantalizing glimpses. Pharaohs such as Thutmose III and Ramses II documented military campaigns into Nubia, and trade expeditions carried gold, ivory, and exotic goods northward. Yet these sources are often Egyptian-centric, framing Nubia as a periphery, a land of tribute or conquest rather than a fully realized civilization with its own agency. How much of Nubia's story was recorded within its own traditions, and how much has simply been lost, erased by time, conquest, or the ephemeral nature of written and oral histories? Could entire dynasties, religious practices, and social innovations have existed in ways that left minimal durable traces, leaving gaps that challenge our understanding of prehistoric human development in the Nile Valley? The material record, though sparse, offers glimpses of sophistication. Excavations at Kerma reveal large mud-brick temples, intricately crafted jewelry, and evidence of long-distance trade with Egypt, the Red Sea, and sub-Saharan Africa. At Meroe, which rose as a political center around 800 BC, the archaeological record reveals pyramids, iron production, and a script, Meroitic, that remains only partially deciphered. These remnants suggest a continuity of culture, administration, and innovation, yet the gaps are striking. Large portions of settlements remain unexplored, written records are fragmentary, and the motives, decisions, and daily lives of the Nubian people often elude reconstruction. What ideas, technologies, or beliefs were lost, leaving only faint traces in the archaeological and material record? Speculative interpretations deepen the intrigue. Some scholars suggest that environmental pressures, such as fluctuating Nile floods, shifting trade routes, or desertification, may have contributed to cultural transitions and gaps in settlement patterns. Others propose that Nubian societies engaged in forms of political organization, religious practice, or social experimentation that left minimal physical evidence, deliberately ephemeral or deeply localized. Could some cultural knowledge have been transmitted orally, performed in rituals or ceremonies now unrecorded? Might centuries of migration, conquest, or assimilation into larger Egyptian or later Kushite polities have obscured the details of Nubian history, leaving a silence that is deliberate, accidental, or both? The interaction between Nubia and Egypt adds further complexity. During periods of Egyptian domination, Nubian elites sometimes adopted Egyptian styles, titles, and religious practices, yet archaeological evidence suggests they also maintained distinct traditions. This duality, adaptation and preservation, creates patterns of continuity and discontinuity that confound easy historical interpretation. How did Nubians negotiate identity under foreign rule? Which elements of local governance, ritual, or craft persisted, and which were absorbed or transformed in the process? The silence in the record may reflect these tensions, a space where social and cultural adaptation occurred outside the lens of surviving texts or monumental inscriptions. Even the visible monuments provoke questions. The pyramids of Meroe, smaller than their Egyptian counterparts but numerous and uniquely designed, evoke ceremonial and religious significance, yet their inscriptions remain largely undeciphered. Burial practices, decorative motifs, and urban layouts hint at cosmologies, hierarchies, and social structures, but the full scope of human intention is obscured. Walking among these pyramids today, one senses both mastery and mystery. Communities capable of remarkable architecture and craft, yet whose voices, for millennia, are partially absent from the written record. What decisions, beliefs, and daily practices are lost to the silence of the sands? Trade and technology further complicate the narrative. Evidence suggests that Nubian states produced iron, traded gold and ivory, and maintained routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean. These economic networks imply sophisticated political organization and cross-cultural interaction, yet how these systems functioned remains unclear. Did environmental change disrupt trade, leading to urban decline? Or did social and political shifts, dynastic conflicts, succession crises, or shifts in elite power reshape the distribution of wealth, authority, and knowledge? The gaps between what is preserved and what likely existed leave profound questions about the resilience and fragility of human systems in ancient Nubia. The silence of Nubian history also highlights the broader pattern of prehistoric gaps explored elsewhere, from ancestral Puebloan migrations to Roman Britain's withdrawal to the Egyptian First Intermediate period. These societies share a common tension: remarkable achievements followed by disruption, transformation, or disappearance, leaving gaps in the material and textual record. In Nubia, this tension is magnified by the dual forces of environment and historiography: arid landscapes that erode evidence and external documentation that privileges neighboring civilizations over local voices. How much of the human story is permanently hidden, and how much might yet emerge through careful excavation, comparative study, and the gradual decipherment of scripts and artifacts? As we contemplate Nubia today, the pyramids of Meroe, the remains of Kerma, the traces of trading centers along the Nile, it is clear that the historical silence is as compelling as the monuments themselves. The visible record reveals skill, resilience, and adaptation, yet it leaves a vast and mysterious space between what is known and what has been lost. How did Nubians navigate cycles of prosperity and disruption? What innovations, beliefs, and societal structures remain invisible? Which voices, decisions, and cultural achievements have been erased by time, leaving gaps that both frustrate and fascinate the modern observer? Nubian historical silence reminds us that human history is not always linear or fully recorded. Civilizations rise, interact, and transform in ways that leave both enduring monuments and profound absences. It challenges us to read not only what is present, the pyramids, temples, and artifacts, but also what is missing, encouraging imagination, careful analysis, and reflection. In these gaps, we confront the mysteries of human resilience, adaptation, and the fragility of cultural memory. What lies buried beneath the sands of Nubia? Which stories, technologies, and social experiments remain undiscovered, waiting to illuminate the shadowed corridors of prehistoric human endeavor? The silence itself, eloquent in its absence, continues to call us forward, inviting exploration, interpretation, and wonder. From the silent pyramids of Nubia, where civilizations flourished and disappeared, leaving fragments and echoes in the desert sands, our journey now carries us across continents to the alluvial plains and riverine landscapes of the lower Mississippi Valley. Here, in what is now northeastern Louisiana, lies Poverty Point, a sprawling complex of earthworks, ridges, and mounds that speak of human ingenuity, communal organization, and ceremonial purpose. Yet even in this remarkable site, an unsettling pattern emerges. A sudden hiatus, a gap in occupation and activity that challenges conventional understanding and raises questions about the forces that shape human settlement over time. Poverty Point flourished approximately between 1700 and 1100 BC, during the late Archaic period of North American prehistory. Unlike the monumental stone architecture of the Old World, its creators shaped the earth itself, constructing massive concentric ridges, platform mounds, and ceremonial plazas with astounding precision. Archaeological surveys reveal structures aligned with cardinal directions, evidence of trade extending hundreds of kilometers, imported stone, copper, and exotic materials, and a network of living spaces indicating a dense, organized community. The scale and sophistication of Poverty Point suggest a level of social coordination, ritual centrality, and technological mastery that is striking for a society often classified as pre-agrarian. Yet, despite the apparent vitality of this settlement, a mysterious hiatus interrupts its narrative. Radiocarbon dates and stratigraphic studies indicate periods during which construction ceased, ceremonial activity waned, and occupation diminished. The reasons remain elusive. Climatic factors, such as fluctuating river levels, extended droughts, or shifts in the Mississippi's course, may have stressed the delicate balance between human habitation and the natural environment. Did water scarcity, flooding, or soil exhaustion drive inhabitants to seek sustenance elsewhere? Or were environmental changes merely catalysts in a more complex social or ritual calculus that prompted temporary withdrawal from this monumental site? The organization of Poverty Point itself hints at social structures capable of responding to extraordinary challenges, yet also vulnerable to disruption. The ridges, built with millions of cubic feet of earth, required labor coordination, planning, and sustained effort. Trade networks linked Poverty Point to distant sources of stone, minerals, and shell, suggesting both economic reach and cultural exchange. Yet during the hiatus, these networks appear to have weakened. The monumental landscape fell into disuse, and the once vibrant ceremonial spaces fell silent. Could conflict with neighboring groups, internal social tension, or shifting spiritual paradigms have contributed to this withdrawal? Or might the hiatus reflect a deliberate seasonal or cyclical pattern of habitation, ritual, or resource management now obscured by the passage of millennia? Excavations have uncovered layers of habitation, hearths, tools, and refuse, painting a picture of daily life that contrasts with the monumental architecture. Pottery fragments, carved stone tools, and animal remains suggest subsistence strategies deeply attuned to the surrounding rivers and forests. Yet even as the material culture demonstrates resilience and adaptability, gaps remain. What were the decision-making processes that led communities to abandon or reduce activity at a site of such apparent importance? Were choices motivated by survival, spiritual necessity, social reorganization, or a combination of factors now invisible to us? Speculative interpretations invite even more profound questions. Some researchers suggest that the hiatus may reflect long-term cycles of population movement across the region. Perhaps Poverty Point functioned as a ceremonial or seasonal hub, occupied intensively during periods of ritual significance or resource abundance, and partially abandoned during leaner years. Others propose that environmental pressures interacted with social and ideological factors. Changing trade patterns, shifting alliances, or the rise of competing centers may have undermined the authority or appeal of the site. Could the apparent cessation of construction and occupation represent a strategic withdrawal, a negotiation between humans and the unpredictable environment of the Mississippi Valley? The scale and precision of Poverty Point's earthworks only deepen the mystery. Concentric ridges, some stretching over a mile, required repeated coordinated labor to construct, implying planning, leadership, and social cohesion. Yet during the hiatus, these monumental features were left to erode under the elements, signaling either a breakdown of authority or a deliberate absence. How does one reconcile the effort required to build such structures with the decision to temporarily abandon them? Were the ridges themselves part of a temporal or ritual cycle, intended to be reactivated after periods of dormancy, or do they represent ambitions interrupted by forces beyond human control? Environmental reconstructions offer partial insight, but also provoke new questions. Core samples and pollen analyses indicate shifts in vegetation, river flow, and local climate coinciding with periods of reduced activity. The Mississippi, a river both sustaining and unpredictable, may have alternately provided fertility and threatened inundation. Did changes in the river's course render the site temporarily less viable, or did cultural perceptions of these changes influence the decision to withdraw? Could the hiatus represent a form of early environmental management, an adaptive response to an ecosystem in flux that modern observers interpret as absence or collapse? Trade and connectivity further complicate interpretation. Artifacts from as far as the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast, and the Appalachian foothills indicate that Poverty Point was part of a wide network of exchange, ideas, and ritual practice. Yet, during the hiatus, the intensity of these connections diminishes. How did regional dynamics, competition, or environmental stress disrupt long-distance trade? Did declining mobility and exchange reflect local decisions, systemic pressures, or forces beyond human control? And what knowledge, skills, or cultural practices may have been lost during this interval, leaving us only fragments to reconstruct the story? Walking across the ridges today, one senses both deliberate design and profound absence. The earthworks, enduring yet weathered, evoke the labor, planning, and vision of a civilization attuned to its environment. But the silence, absence of ceremonial activity, abandonment of habitation, and diminished trade raises the same questions that echo through other prehistoric time gaps. What drove the interruption, and what remains hidden beyond the archaeological record? Are the missing pieces a reflection of human choice, environmental necessity, or a combination too complex to untangle fully? Poverty Point's hiatus is not an isolated phenomenon. It resonates with broader patterns observed globally. Societies as diverse as the ancestral Puebloans, the civilizations of Nubia, and the Old Kingdom of Egypt demonstrate periods of abandonment, population movement, or cessation of monumental activity. In each case, gaps appear alongside signs of ingenuity, adaptation, and cultural complexity. What can these pauses teach us about the nature of human civilization? How do environmental, social, and ideological pressures converge to produce patterns of occupation and absence that leave enduring mysteries? The hiatus at Poverty Point invites us to confront the limits of our knowledge. It challenges us to read the landscape, the artifacts, and the earthworks with patience, imagination, and a recognition of what is absent as much as what is present. Did communities eventually return to the ridges, reactivating ceremonial life and trade networks, or did the hiatus mark a more permanent reconfiguration of settlement patterns? Which stories, skills, and traditions vanished during this interval, leaving gaps in the cultural memory of North America's prehistoric peoples? In reflecting on Poverty Point, one is reminded that human history is not only written in monuments, inscriptions, and artifacts. It is also inscribed in absence, in pauses, in interruptions that challenge comprehension. The hiatus speaks to resilience, vulnerability, and the interplay between environment, culture, and human choice. What lies hidden beneath the soil of the Mississippi Valley, waiting to illuminate the strategies, beliefs, and decisions of those who shaped and then withdrew from this monumental landscape? The gaps remain, silent yet compelling, drawing us deeper into the story of prehistoric societies and the enduring mysteries that define them. From the earthworks of Poverty Point, where ancient hands shaped the land and then mysteriously withdrew, our journey once again turns to the great river valleys of human civilization, to the lifeblood of Northeast Africa, the Nile. Here, long before the pharaohs crowned with gold or pyramids rose to the sky, Pre-Dynastic Egypt stretched along fertile banks and arid deserts, a landscape simultaneously hospitable and treacherous. It is a land of sun-scorched sands and glistening river channels, where early human communities navigated the rhythms of flood and drought, hunting, gathering, and experimenting with the earliest forms of agriculture. Yet much about this formative era, roughly 6,000 to 3,100 BC, remains cloaked in obscurity, with gaps in chronology, culture, and political development that challenge our understanding of civilization's earliest steps. The pre-dynastic period is distinguished not by monumental architecture, but by subtler, elusive traces: pottery shards, cemetery mounds, village remains, and the faint impressions of ritual objects. Sites such as Nakata, Hierakonpolis, and Abydos reveal communities that were increasingly complex, exhibiting social stratification, specialized craft production, and long-distance exchange networks. Artifacts suggest a growing awareness of identity, status, and symbolic expression. But these signs, while tantalizing, are fragmentary. Why do we have glimpses of culture in some regions, yet almost nothing in others? What lies hidden beneath sand, silt, and time, waiting to illuminate the earliest forms of Egyptian society? The material culture provides both insight and mystery. Nakata pottery, adorned with intricate geometric patterns or depictions of animals, indicates an emerging symbolic sophistication and perhaps ritual significance. Stone tools and cosmetic palettes suggest technical skill, aesthetic consideration, and social differentiation. Graves from this period reveal variations in burial goods and positions, hinting at hierarchies that may have foreshadowed the later pharaonic dynasties. Yet, the reasons behind these differences remain unclear. Were they determined by lineage, occupation, spiritual status, or another factor now lost to time? And why do some regions exhibit sudden bursts of complexity while others remain comparatively simple? Trade and interaction further complicate the narrative. Obsidian, turquoise, and shells from distant lands imply extensive networks spanning the Nile Valley, the Red Sea, and beyond. Such connectivity suggests that pre-dynastic communities were not isolated, but engaged in exchanges of material, ideas, and perhaps rituals. Yet the pathways of trade, the mechanisms of exchange, and the social structures that facilitated these interactions are poorly understood. Did these networks support emergent elites? Did they transmit religious or ideological innovations? And how did environmental and social pressures influence the continuity or interruption of these connections? Environmental factors undoubtedly shaped the rhythm of life. The Nile's annual flood, while a source of fertility, demanded adaptability. Settlements had to anticipate inundation, manage irrigation, and secure food storage. Evidence of shifting settlement patterns suggests that communities were acutely responsive to changing water levels, soil fertility, and climate variability. Could environmental stress explain gaps in the archaeological record? Did some communities abandon sites temporarily or permanently due to drought, flood, or soil depletion? And how might these fluctuations have influenced the emergence of centralized authority, laying the groundwork for Egypt's dynastic civilization? The pre-dynastic era also hints at early forms of political and ritual organization, though the details remain fragmentary. Some cemeteries exhibit evidence of standardized burial practices, alignment of graves, and symbolic artifacts that suggest leaders or influential figures. Ritual centers, sometimes accompanied by monumental or ceremonial structures, hint at nascent religious hierarchies. Yet the gaps in knowledge are profound. Who held authority? How was it negotiated and transmitted? And how did localized cultural practices eventually converge into the unified state that would characterize dynastic Egypt? Settlement patterns further complicate understanding. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of clustered villages along the Nile, yet some regions remain nearly invisible. What factors determine the location, density, and duration of these early communities? Did trade, ritual sites, environmental conditions, or social alliances dictate settlement decisions? And how did the interplay of these forces create periods of flourishing activity punctuated by absence or reorganization, gaps that echo the wider pattern of prehistoric human pauses observed globally from Nubia to Poverty Point? The pre-dynastic era also poses profound questions about the origins of writing, administration, and monumental architecture. Early symbols and proto-hieroglyphs appear on pottery, tags, and cosmetic palettes, hinting at emerging systems of record-keeping and communication. Yet their meanings are largely undeciphered, leaving a tantalizing gap between evidence and interpretation. Did these symbols denote property, lineage, or ritual significance? How did they evolve into the formal writing systems of the dynastic period? And what knowledge was created, transmitted, or lost during this formative interval? Walking through pre-dynastic sites today, one is struck by both continuity and silence. The land, shaped by the Nile, holds traces of human ingenuity and adaptation. Graves, settlements, artifacts, and symbolic designs. Yet immense gaps remain. The absence of large-scale monuments, comprehensive written records, and detailed accounts challenges our capacity to fully reconstruct the period. These silences are themselves instructive, speaking to the fragility of early civilizations, the unpredictability of environmental and social forces, and the enigmatic nature of human innovation. The pre-dynastic period, like the other prehistoric gaps we have explored, from Poverty Point to Nubia, from ancestral Puebloan settlements to Stonehenge, reveals that human history is rarely linear. Societies rise, experiment, and transform, leaving patterns that are partially visible and partially hidden. Each absence, each fragment, invites us to imagine, interpret, and probe the limits of our understanding. What knowledge, ritual practice, and social organization existed along the Nile in these formative centuries, now irretrievably lost? Which communities, decisions, and innovations laid the foundations for the pharaonic state, and which disappeared into the void of prehistory? In contemplating pre-dynastic Egypt, we confront the duality of human endeavor, the visible traces of ingenuity and creativity, and the invisible forces, environmental, social, ideological, that shaped human trajectories and remain hidden from our view. The gaps, silences, and hiatuses are as significant as the artifacts themselves, compelling us to wonder, question, and explore. What lies beneath the sands and along the Nile's ancient channels, waiting to illuminate the mysteries of the world's earliest complex society? How did humans transition from scattered communities to dynasties that would endure for millennia? And what knowledge, practice, and memory have been lost in the process? The story of pre-dynastic Egypt is not simply one of beginnings. It is a story of uncertainty, adaptation, and human creativity amidst constraints and gaps. It reminds us that even in the cradle of one of history's most famous civilizations, time has left lacuna, silent, incomplete, and compelling. In these spaces, we find not only questions, but an invitation to probe, to imagine, and to consider the lives, choices, and innovations of those who lived in the shadow of the Nile long before the age of the pharaohs, the age of